Hello and welcome. Today we will be reading Youjo Senki Saga of Tanya the Evil, Volume 1, Chapter 3, The Watch/Guard of the Rhine. Chapter 3, The Rhine Front. The sky over the Rhine front. Among the mages soared through it is Second Lieutenant Tanya Dagarachev. It always separates her from the others. It's that she's been ordered to fly solo. If anything separates her from the others, it's that she's been ordered to fly solo. Why was I given such orders? Because the higher-ups are idiots, she answered to herself. And I'm flying around the front lines alone. The whole sad story of how I was sent here can be told in 3 sentences. Perhaps this is unexpected for the Empire. But as someone hastily selected for deployment due to the higher-ups' lack of foresight, I can't really let it go as simply an unanticipated turn of events. I've learned from my experience against the Entente Alliance on the northern front that there's no cover in the sky. Clouds are about the closest thing you get. And as for defense, mages are lucky in that they're tough. But just because I'm resilient doesn't mean I'm immortal. If someone asks me to stand in front of a high-penetration sniper rifle or a machine gun with a caliber that breaks the scale, my answer will be a flat no. Solo assignments are worse for mages than any other branch of the military. Nevertheless, the brass ordered Tanya to fly alone in hopes of drawing out a strategic delay. How can a lowly second lieutenant possibly dodge that order? All I can do is adhere to my employer's regulations like a salaryman should. I want to weep from the lack of such a noble concept, a soldier's right to refuse. As for my aerial combat maneuvers, my diligent training in the academy earned me the ACM skill badge. Whining that I can't fly isn't a valid tactic at this point. And so, no matter how loath she was to go, Tanya nevertheless scrambled to fly ahead of the land forces. She would serve as airborne early warning and a scout for the forward warning line. Western Army Group's control center gave her the call sign, Hawkeye. It was certainly preferable to the ferry that she had gone by on the northern front. Hawkeye 03 to command post. Please respond. Hawkeye 03 is my temporary call sign as a member of the early warning team. With eyes like a hawk, my job is to fly ahead to search for enemies and notify the advancing troops if I find any. Other than that, I'm supposed to maintain a fixed distance from the approaching enemy and continue gathering intelligence. Depending on the situation, my duties might eventually include taking on the role of forward air controller to guide direct support groups. Unfortunately, though, I have to admit this job is tougher than I thought it would be. I didn't realize I'd have to work so hard just to contact the controller of the area I've been assigned to. Hawkeye 03 to command post. Please respond. Ever since the surprise attack, radio communications have been growing more and more chaotic. With that in mind, perhaps I'm lucky that ground control eventually connects to the one of Tanya's repeated and exasperated calls. This is 7th Provisional Field Command. Call sign Lizard 08. Reception is poor, but not a problem, Hawkeye 03. Send your traffic. Basically, every single type of unit targeting land forces wants to take out the enemy's eye in the sky. Aerial mages. First thing. This situation is essentially the same as the one I experienced on my missions in Norden. If an enemy army fails to secure air and magical superiority, it's akin to losing their ability to see. Lone magic officers are preyed upon more than any other unit in the military. In a military operation, the first course of action is generally to eliminate interference, not that you can afford to neglect anything. Roger, 0 Lizard 8. I can hear you on my end as well. Commencing support mission now. Thanks, Hawkeye 03. Glad to have you. We've been needing another pair of eyes. And that makes what's coming next even worse. Now I have to kill. The excitement of troops who are kill the excitement of troops who are sincerely thrilled to finally get decent support. Hawkeye 03 to Lizard 08. Sorry to say this so soon, but don't expect much help from me after all. I've picked up a large group approaching fast from up ahead. As a solo mage under enemy assault, it's out of my hands. If I get attacked the moment I arrive, then I have to defend myself before I can provide intelligent support. Personally speaking, Tanya feels no desire to take pointless risk out of some desire to sacrifice herself for the greater good. She focuses as much as possible as she possibly can on ensuring her own safety. Anyway, if it's necessary to fly solo, then the moment enemy detection is confirmed, fleeing becomes the name of the game. So although I hate to draw attention, I gain altitude using the power of the Type 95's computation orb, which has been issued to me for field tests. As always, I take advantage of my acceleration abilities and ascend to a certain point, where I can quickly dart up and out of range of any hostile enemy aircraft sent after me. At the same time, in anticipation of anti-air fire from the ground, I form the best protective film I can beneath me. A single hit would probably be all I can take. The altitude I choose for my survival is 8,000 feet. Oh, they're using feet now instead of meters. Interesting. That's the upper limit for combat operations, which were made possible by the protection of the Lord and the Type 95. According to the mad scientist, this is a fruit of a miraculous collaboration between the hands of God and man, but the details of how this technological innovation was accomplished are immensely unpleasant for a certain free-spirited individual. Not only is this device cursed, but the most vexing part of all is that Tanya has no hope of escaping the duty of being its dedicated tester, since she's the only one who can operate it. While there are other ways to look at the situation, someone might describe it as being, quote, in the care of Providence, unquote, or blessed, but Tanya adamantly refuses to think of it in that light. There are reasons for that I don't even want to talk about. In a manga I read not long ago, a member of a crime syndicate whispered that secrets make a woman beautiful, but that's an unmitigated lie. The more Tanya uses the orb, the deeper it engraves this faith or whatever in her mind. With no choice but to praise the Lord, I'm dying for my inner self to be free again. Well, before I start to think about this stuff too much, I should at least do the job before me. It's time to get down to business. This is what it means to be hounded by reality until you lose your inner freedom. An approximately company-sized group of mages is rapidly approaching from 3 o'clock. Tanya conveys what she can observe of the enemy to ground control as she gains altitude, all the while grinding her teeth and vehemently cursing the ineptitude of the higher-ups in her head. Tanya was out here with a target on her back due to their failure to notice the Franco republics coming from the west. This gravest error was committing forces to trample the Entente alliance in earnest. They had faithfully followed the theories of force concentration, pursuing battle in their desire for ever greater military achievement. Some even had delusions of annexation, it seemed. Thanks to that, they left their own country unguarded, stupidly inviting an invasion from the west. I can't help but laugh. Normally, according to the Empire's defense plan, 315, it's fine for the North to just focus on delaying operations. The Northern Army Group is responsible for the Northeastern Front. Lately, there's been an argument that they should support the Eastern Army Group against the Empire's primary potential enemy, the Federation. So that would be the Russian Federation, also the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics. If each individual army group was prioritizing defense, reinforcements would be only sporadically available, and they would have no hope in hell of achieving total victory. As such, the General Staff had apparently schemed to take advantage of the unanticipated large-scale invasion and cut down the Entente alliance with a single stroke by mobilizing reserves on a grand scale. Mobilizing so many troops, however, rapidly altered the situation. The art of war, okay, here's a quote here. The art of war is of vital importance to the state. So that's a quote from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. However, the Empire's foolhardy mobilization showed poor judgment at a time when established national strategy called for caution. Whether it liked it or not, its actions had provoked the surrounding countries. In the same way, the Empire hoped to proactively take out the Entente alliance to gain future national defense advantages. The Franco's Republic decided to take advantage of the opening and launch a preemptive strike of its own. Only an idiot could say they didn't see it coming. But clearly, idiots they were. To the Empire, the mobilization was surely meant to address the problems between it and the Entente alliance. The neighboring nations are nervous about the Empire's ever-present interest in increasing its military might. However, and consider the prospect of a break in the encirclement terrifying. Not to mention, the Franco-Republic to the west is unable to overlook the Empire's overall goal. The long smoldering border disputes and territorial issues between the two have erupted into localized wars on multiple occasions in the past. The chains binding the cornered empire are beginning to loosen, and what if the master isn't home because he's out trying to pry them off? Fully aware of the gap between its own military strength and that of the potential enemy, the Franco's Republic believed that it could not miss this opportunity. Ironically, it did the exact opposite of the Empire, with its huge debate roaring about whether or not to break from the existing military strategy. In the Franco-Republic, they had no choice but to go on the offensive to ensure the effectiveness of their own strategy. I've also got a battalion-sized ground unit at 1 o'clock. Also multiple unidentified aircraft are approaching fast. That's how Tanya had ended up flying, forced to use this new orb she doesn't even want, while facing swarms of incoming hostile mages. Lizard 08, roger. Take immediate evasive action. The relationship between the Empire and the Franco-Republic is such that they both have a fairly good idea of the cards in each other's hands. Naturally, the Franco-Republic can predict that the Empire will confront the encirclement via interior lines. As a result, its defense strategy focused tightly on how to defeat the interior line strategy of its potential enemy. The solution is quite simple. Before the Empire completes its large-scale mobilization, the Republic's core standing army would storm and subdue the Empire's western region, the source of a great deal of its industry and military power. That would drastically cut down the Empire's war potential. The Republic's strategy also includes taking action if the Empire invades a third nation. Strictly speaking, the Republic's position gives it no choice but to frame all its actions as responses to the Empire. If the leaders let the situation be, they would eventually have to contend with an Empire free of northeastern pressure. As such, they have to act now while they can still gain the upper hand. Oh, I get it. From a purely historical perspective, it's possible to say that the Northern Front will be decided in one blow. It would really only take a second. Anyone with common sense, even an amateur, could clearly see that the war is going to end soon. The Entente Alliance's resistance wouldn't amount to anything, and it would be forced to surrender to the Empire. That snapshot of the future is too realistic for the analysts to be flawed, but a specialist would have told you it wasn't quite right. A few months is a bit fast for a country to fall into ruin, but strategically, it's also far too long to have your main forces tied up. In a few weeks, mobilization would be complete, and the troops would be able to march in great numbers. Under those circumstances, an offensive would become a seductive option for the Franco's Republic. It's akin to the Empire's conviction that it could use the northern theater to break the fetters that had kept it bound to their defensive policy. For years, the Franco Republic is equally confident that, with this one move, it can eliminate a significant threat that has been plaguing its fatherland's national defense for far too long. The Empire is prioritizing victory in the Northern Theater. In other words, the higher-ups are insisting that it is a strategic decision. Really, they either foolishly failed to foresee this scenario, or it did occur to them, and they underestimated the probability. The war has been recklessly directed in the first place. The stupid radio stations and newspapers were celebrating the sweeping victory on the Northern Theater with Drek-like. Okay, I don't even know what that word means. Drek-like. Okay. Quote, "This is the Empire's secret plan to avoid a multi-front war, and the roar of artillery heralds the birth of a new world order." End quote. And now, thanks to the sudden attack, they're slinging daily propaganda about the diabolical Franco's Republic, but the people on the front lines didn't care about the propaganda. That's only good for making jokes about the brass to kill time in the trenches. They want to yell. If you can afford to broadcast propaganda all the way to the front, get more men and supplies over here. They're the ones in trouble if the higher-ups keep arguing about causes and ideals instead of facing reality. It looks like the Vanguard mages have spotted me. They're still coming up fast. Reality is cruel, but also simple. The forces in the Western Theater are basically a punching bag until the main forces return. The Empire has reached the limit of its resources. The proof is the special deployment of the instructor squad from the forces at home and the evaluation unit that assesses the practicality of pre-production models. Really, the instruction and research-oriented units are meant to improve the overall quality of the army from the rear, not to fight on the front. Sending them in is usually a taboo that only a nation nearing its end would violate. Of course, these units are universally skilled, which makes them great problem solvers, and that's why, with the nation in a panic over the unexpected development, Tanya got thrown from the home front research lab to the front lines. Lizard 08 to Hawkeye 03. We'll send reinforcements immediately. Hawkeye 03 to Lizard 08. I'd appreciate it, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Tanya acknowledges as she promptly begins to withdraw. She's allowed to run this time. No need to tough it out. Leaving this airspace. Hawkeye 03, good luck. Out on the battlefield, incoming reinforcements might seem like a ray of hope, but I know all too well from both personal experience and history that they are more often than not. But I know all too well from both personal experience and history that more often than not, they don't make it in time. It's the epitome of stupidity to count on unreliable backup and risk one's life with wishful thinking, so I give my undivided attention to retreating. Hawkeye 03, roger. The hand I've been dealt is discouraging, but I know I need to confront reality, even if it makes me reluctant enough to pull a face. The impatience and conflict in Tanya's blue eyes resembles that of a philosopher yearning to explore the wisdom of humankind. The groan that slips from her adorable mouth is that in that immature voice. Her indignation at the unfairness of the situation embodies the innocence of a child. Tanya Digrichev's worries are quite simple. She's angry that the duties dumped on her exceed her pay grade, and she's distressed by her evil workplace that fails to comply with safety regulations. She would accept the existence of unions, and she wishes with all her heart for the creation of labor laws. My, isn't that an about-face? Anyway, part of the issue is my personal conflict with the Army's goal-oriented rationale. Armies generally supply aviation personnel with high-calorie diets as a means to relieve fatigue and maintain the concentration necessary for withstanding consecutive days of intense combat. And that's great. In the Empire, too, mages and pilots have to be provided high-calorie diets. But I'm not so sure I want them to make me take Pervin pervitin, I'm pronouncing this poorly, and hesitant doesn't even begin to describe how I feel about my orb as a trump card. The fruit of the collaboration between Being X and the mad scientist could poison my sharp mind in a manner far more insidious than any drug. Really, I should have gotten rid of it. So, there should be an editor's note here, but there isn't. However, I'm going to insert one. So, Pervin, or Pervitin as it is spelled here, was a methamphetamine compound that was used during the Second World War for pilots who were part of the Luftwaffe, and essentially what it does is it's literally meth. It's meth pills. It keeps you awake, hyped up, super hyper, very responsive when you see something, even if you're super tired. If you're a soldier, it'll get you to march for days without eating and then basically drop dead from exhaustion, that sort of thing. They're also extremely addictive. Yeah, it's basically, I think, a mix of meth, cocaine, and some other drugs that are just kind of thrown together as a stimulant for soldiers in the front lines. Yes, and at the same time, they obviously caused a lot of social issues after the war because you had people who were literally addicted to cocaine and meth that came back from the war, and a lot of them also had alcoholism and PTSD and a whole bunch of other mess. But in any case, it seems that in this timeline, Tanya has been exposed to Pervin. Glorious. Anyway, I'll continue here. But I'm not so sure I want them to make me take Pervin, and hesitant doesn't even begin to describe how I feel about my orb as a trump card. The fruit of the collaboration between Being X and the mad scientist could poison my sharp mind in a manner far more insidious than any drug. Really, I should have just gotten rid of it. That's how desperately I don't want to use the Type 95. I really hate the idea of relying on that damned computation orb steeped in the grace of God, but what if I need it to survive? Truly, the ultimate choice. This was supposed to be a day like any other for the 228th Reconnaissance Mage Company, commanded by First Lieutenant Michael Hossmann. The Francos Republic Army had successfully conducted a surprise attack, and this company was in forward-most advanced guard. Even if the surprise, shall we say, was beginning to wear off in places and the mission was transitioning to assault, the spearhead's duties didn't change. Crush the Imperial Army's eyes as it attempts to recover from the chaos, and cut off their communications while you're at it. That was the order of the day for the Francos. Their duty was to isolate the enemy and prevent the formation of an organized line of resistance, which would help later troops widen the breach. It was the same assignment that these veterans and First Lieutenant Hossmann had received the previous day, yet on a real battlefield, unlike in war films or novels, there was no foreshadowing what would come next. Golf 01 to CP. I've encountered an enemy sentinel. CP Roger. We think it's local direct support. Upon elimination, continue search for the enemy's main forces. Luck isn't on this guy's side. That was First Lieutenant Hossmann's impression. And after all, this sentinel was up against a whole company of mages, and it was Hossmann's company, the vanguard for the entire army. Okay, that's clearly a translation error. That doesn't make any sense. Let me read that again. After all, this sentinel was up against a whole company of mages, and it was Hossmann's company, the vanguard of the entire army. Okay. It was obviously not a fair fight. That was why the enemy mages had been focused on running even since detecting the company's approach. Seeing that response, Hossmann immediately recognized that their opponent was extremely accomplished and excellent at quick decision-making. The lone mage had already climbed to the impractical altitude of 8,000 feet, and that was why Hossmann couldn't help but consider the enemy unlucky. Soldiers never lived long without luck, no matter how skilled they were. Golf 01, Roger. But that mage sure was bold, climbing up to 8,000. Nobody could last long up there, but it was their only avenue of escape in the face of a whole company. Hausman was also perfectly aware of that fact. To shake off pursuit in a confrontation like this, their opponents' only options were to flee where hunters would be hesitant to follow, or to fly erratically low to the ground and trust everything to fate. Units advancing over long distances were usually loath to expend the energy necessary to climb that high. So the Sentinel had assumed they would avoid that option. Not bad. Only little kids can get away with crying. It's too high. I can't reach. Let's get to work, men. They couldn't very well let an enemy mage escape to fly another day. Considering their mission, there was no way they were backing down. Everyone got that? Okay. Platoon Mike will eliminate the Sentinel. Everyone else is conducting recon in force with me. We're going to blast right through. With the Empire's warning line spread so thin, the Republic had a good chance of victory. This was the guiding light that for everyone participating in the operation. Regardless of rank, they wouldn't waste time on a provisional defensive line when the main enemy force could return. This was why the reconnaissance mage units were crucial to disrupting the enemy's lines. They would start with the usual recon in force, or force recon rather, which entailed initiating contact with the enemy to gather intelligence. But they were then expected to also create openings to break through. Knowing that Republic victory rested on their shoulders, they were determined not to get routed. Wilco, we'll catch up with him right quick. After the platoon leader's acknowledgement, Platoon Mike climbed rapidly. Naturally, operating at 8,000 feet would be exhausting even for the Republic's elites. Standard combat altitude was 4,000 meters, though if they really pushed it, they could tolerate 6,000. In this sense, their enemy was doubly clever for choosing 8,000. Is that feet or meters? First, the chaos would exhaust Platoon Mike, reducing the overall strength of the recon and force mission to 2 platoons. Also, the Sentinel was making significant contributions to the wider battle by distracting the enemy and dragging things out. We're taking on a respectable opponent. Engage, Fox 01. Fox 01. The silence of First Lieutenant Hausman's thoughts was suddenly shattered by radio contact from one of his men. As company commander, he followed the call for long-range magic formula fire. Basically calling in air support. At the same time, the enemy soldier in front of them performed a new maneuver after realizing that escape was impossible. The bandit abruptly circled around to rush Platoon Mike as if descending upon some prey. Apparently, the lone mage was taking the offensive. Fox 02, Fox 02, I can't believe it. He dodged that. The confused voice of his subordinate on the radio contained both surprise at the enemy strike as well as the shock of his shot missing. As Hausman speculated about their enemy's intentions, the distance between Platoon Mike and the mage shrank considerably. Hausman was in a somewhat removed position, but when he confirmed the platoon had cautiously began combat maneuvers, he was certain they were on top of it. Was the enemy trying to squeeze more time out of them by engaging at close quarters? As a tactic that could be employed immediately, it wasn't a bad choice. But Unit Mike was a platoon, not a company. The coordination of a platoon was too tight to easily disrupt, and the difference in their combat potential made it hopeless for one mage to take them on all alone. Hausman respected the courage and resolve, but it was a reckless maneuver. Enemy incoming! Disperse! Disperse! That very moment, Platoon Mike spread out to shift to a formation more suitable to close combat. Their objective was eliminating the opposition's eye in the sky to support follow-up Republican attacks. Their plucky opponent couldn't have known it, but the Reconnaissance Mage Company's mission had been all but accomplished the moment they made visual contact. Take out their eyes. If they do that, if they were held up for a bit, that would be fine. 3 rounds of interlocking fire. Get your formulas ready. Nail them. Fox 03, Fox 03. The the coordination and skill of Hosman's subordinates were textbook ideal, as they deliberately kept from some distance in order to intercept the charge and maintain crossfire. The enemy mage had entered the line of formula bullet fire. Even if he had superior speed, Hosman's men were ready and waiting. It wouldn't be hard to nail him. But what happened next was something no one could have predicted. It was definitely a direct hit. Regulated fire of military-grade explosive formulas, which could easily strip off a mage's protective film and even chip their solid defensive shell, had hit the target dead on. Fox 03, Fox 03, shit, the bastard's so tough! The moment the formulas in the multiple bullets activated, the flames should have swallowed up the enemy mage for sure. But even so, that thing continued its advance without missing a beat, casually closing the distance as if it were flying through an empty sky. By intuition, not logic, they sensed something bad was happening. However, as civilization had advanced, humans as a species were no longer in touch with their animal reflexes. Mike 3, check 6, check 6, ah, damn it! In the blink of an eye, the bandit had rushed Hosman's subordinate. Absurdly, but undeniably, a magic blade sprouted from the man's chest. Then, in a single, unenthusiastic motion, as civil as someone cutting up their dinner, the blade sliced clean through him. Pan pan, pan pan, pan pan. I'm not sure what that means. What is that thing? What? It's... Fox 04! A tangle of radio calls. What was that? What the hell was that? Hosman watched the unfolding scene through his binoculars. He couldn't believe his eyes. In terms of air combat maneuvers, ACM, Platoon Mike was the best in his company. They were being given the runaround? It can't be, he muttered in spite of himself. Can a mage really move that fast? Mike 1! Mike 1! By the time Hosman realized Platoon Mike was half paralyzed, 1 and 3 were down, and the engine of 4's computation orb seemed done for. He had stalled and was falling. 2 was barely hanging in there by a thread, covering for 4, and couldn't last long either. Shit, bravo, Golf! Turn back, turn back! We have to cover Mike! There was no way First Lieutenant Hosman could stand idly by while his men were in trouble. He abruptly ordered the platoon in his command to race back to fall back at full combat speed to support Platoon Mike. But inside he wondered, how? No matter how much individual abilities differed between mages, could there ever be a fight this lopsided? He had heard that some Imperial mages were armed with specially tuned computation orbs and had naturally high mana output. But even then, the most they could take was a 2-man team. Supposedly, even those named monsters mostly specialized in hit-and-run tactics. For someone to face a platoon head-on and capably, instead of picking off the mages one by one, was inconceivable. Enemy in range. As the company commander, though, Hosman didn't have time to lose himself in those thoughts. The enemy was already within shooting distance. The question on his mind had nothing to do with the fight, so he pushed it aside and called out sharpshooting formulas at long range in flight formations. It was a little far, but with a hail of bullets from 2 platoons, they couldn't afford to miss. They couldn't possibly miss. Their opponent must have understood that as well, and began taking textbook evasive action, which was perfectly fine. There was only one problem. Just how was that mage flittering around as if gravity itself didn't exist? Fox 01, Fox 01, but the most unbelievable thing, no, the utter nightmare, was how resistant the enemy's protective film was. Although the recon company had prioritized accuracy due to the long-distance nature of their shots, they had combined, albeit imperfectly, explosion formulas with the guidance formulas. Even if this target dodged all the shells, there was no one who could completely avoid the fireball blotting out the sky. But the enemy didn't seem to be in any pain, and returned fire unfazed. Hosman had to wonder if this was a joke. I'm going in, cover me. Golf 02 probably felt like they weren't getting anywhere, so he charged in with magic sword in hand. Certainly, no matter how tough someone was, they'd have to take some damage from a close quarters slash with a magic sword. If the platoon couldn't finish the enemy off at range, concentrating their fire was also a reasonable strategy. "We got him! Fox 2! Fox 2!" They agreed with and advanced, ready for a mid-range brawl where it would be difficult to take evasive action. At the same time, they executed the named killer, an intentionally famous tradition of the Republics and the epitome of fire discipline. I'm assuming named killer is some kind of strategy. Anyway, continuing. The support fire was 6 sharpshooting formulas and an explosion spell as a smokescreen, and they all made a direct hit, or rather, it should have. He's still fine? Of all the ridiculous Golf 02, break, break, the enemy mage was still up and running even after the combination of restraining and enveloping mid-range fire. Those sharpshooting formulas can pierce subpar defensive shells easily. How can anyone still fly after that? Though he could hardly take it all in at once, he didn't have time to ponder the question. As for Golf 02, who had tried to charge in close, he just barely managed to escape the tiger jaws thanks to Mike 02's cover fire. Then the enemy mage shot through 2 protective films like they were nothing, and took the men out out of the fight. "It's a trap, you piece of shit!" Hossman had. He didn't like it, but he knew it was the truth. Evading by climbing to 8,000 feet was a trick to divide our forces. Common sense says combat maneuvers are impossible at 8,000, but that's been proven false. We walked right into this. My men are being taken out one after another, and it's all my fault. Chewing his lower lip, he was having trouble swallowing his fury at the deaths of his subordinates, but he understood the situation they were in. He knew it all too well. They had encountered a monster, an unknown named mage. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, we've encountered a new type of enemy. Shit! And they said this would be easy. Golf 01 to CP, this is an emergency. Tally 1 unknown named, requesting reinforcements and permission to RTB. RTB is return to base." Okay, continuing. Imperial Army Technology Research Lab Board of Review. When building a new weapon, it wasn't enough to simply implement the latest technology. Production cost, maintainability, and mission-capable rate were all matters of life and death. Even so, many elements were difficult to evaluate without using the weapon in actual combat. To the general staff, the fighting with the Frankos Republic that had broken out in the West was a horrible disaster, but to the Type 95 development team, it meant a highly anticipated chance to try the orb out on the field. The engineers eagerly awaited the results en masse, and the Type 95 proved itself. It blew far past their expectations. How did the battle go? Very well. 6 down, 3 defeated, 3 missing. According to the observer squad, it's incredibly doubtful that the 3 who went missing will make it back to their base alive. They had assumed it would be impossible after all. The experiment had only succeeded thanks to a miracle. But the test run had yielded surprising results. The Type 95's achievements were worthy of all the praise the elated technology personnel were heaping on it. They could hardly stop grinning. Of course, the skill of the user made a big difference. Second Lieutenant Degorichov certainly had the skills of a Silver Wings assault badge recipient. But that alone shouldn't have been enough to overcome such a disadvantage and get such impressive results. She basically took out an entire company by herself. She didn't defeat all the mages, but she had still repulsed the whole unit. She was overwhelmingly superior in a fundamental sense, nothing more. The theoretical values had indicated possibilities, but she had made them real. Yes, to think it's come so far. From a common sense perspective, the results could only be described as incredible. The orb was nothing short of revolutionary. This technological innovation opened the door to a whole new universe of combat. Right, judging from its record at Elenium Arms, I was expecting it to have major issues. The officers who had questioned continuing development were now commenting in wonder, almost self-deprecating. They had been so worried about this thing, but when they saw what it was really like, the results were so good that all previous failures could be forgotten. If it could perform this well, everything was fine. They could even lower the cost via mass production. Oh, it's had issues, all right. The tech department grandly threw a bucket of cold water on them and their admiration. They understood operations feeling all too well. They were excited by the revolutionary technology. So they were hoping for a revolutionary improvement in quality. But unfortunately, it was all a fantasy. They had to wake everyone up from the dream. What do you mean? It's achieved far more than we had expected from a solo flyer. Right. This thing could change mage combat as we know it. Certainly. The Type 95 has achieved stellar results. That was a fact. In terms of performance, it was in such a league of its own that you could call it a next-generation orb. That was made possible by quad-core synchronization. The quad-core engine's demonstration of mana fixation in actual combat and the possibilities inherent in that were enough to make operations drool. After all, the technology to stabilize mana and store it like bullets was of immense tactical value. The ability to freely use stored mana effectively removed the barrier of mana capacity. My understanding is that all the worries and criticisms raised in the past have been proven false in combat, a general staff officer muttered. Really, the achievements spoke for themselves. Quad-core synchronization made quadruple output a reality, increasing combat potential to a whole new level. After seeing the technology was usable, operations had to have it. We only have one successful case. The project has been a huge failure unless we say the goal was simply to verify the technology. But engineers didn't deploy the Type 95 in order to convince the Army to adopt it. They just wanted to see what kinds of issues would come up in actual field use. So when war broke out in the West, they sent it to the front. They had focused on the tech and never even considered mass producing it. What happened in the other cases? The most successful case was also the only successful case. If anyone asked about the prospect of mass production, they would have to raise doubts as to whether they could reproduce their success. Users of mage technology were already a chosen few, but even then, an orb with only one successful operator couldn't have much chance for mass production as a weapon. In one of the worst tests, there was an explosion in the lab, and we lost a whole platoon. Jesus. The things were constantly blowing up. One defective circuit would cause them to self-destruct. If someone could manage to coat the orb with mana, it could take a beating, according to the actual combat trials. However, the success rate of that critical step was hopelessly low. The worst accident had occurred during a synchronization failure. 4 times the usual mana had detonated and blown away the platoon doing the testing. A group of elites, including instructors from Central and members of the Advanced Technology Inspection Corps. But it can shoot bursts of mana, right? That's too appealing to give up on. The only one who can use it is Lieutenant Tanya Degrichov. The best anyone else has managed is not getting blown up. As developers and engineers, they were ethically bound to push back. Even the engineers who had requested to continue research had only cared about the technological revolution. After their impulsively inquisitive minds had been inspired, Chief Engineer von Schugel and his team had spent their days focused only on testing the limits of what was possible. But when they took a moment to think calmly, they were the ones who best understood the orb's dangers and difficulties. Of course they understood. They built the bloody thing. But you have one successful case, right? Can't you just replicate it? I told you, we almost lost Elenium Arms, damn it! Even the successful case of Lieutenant Degrichov was a total fluke. Though I shouldn't be saying that as an engineer. We still don't even really know what happened. Analysis of observed values made it clear that mana fixation via quad-core synchronization was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The experiment was a miraculous success, but they had measured enough mana to know that if the test had failed, the entire Elenium Arms factory would have been blown to pieces. It was obvious to anyone with a modicum of sense that they couldn't afford to repeatedly fail an experiment that would cause destruction on that scale. A fluke? Just when a runaway mana reaction was about to melt the cores, the interference were waves harmonized and movements away from liquefaction. And moments away from liquefaction, the cores synchronized. For the engineers, it was a frustrating result. They didn't know how, but they had managed to succeed. By some fantastic stroke of luck, the uncontrollable mana had just happened to straighten itself out. That was as far as they could grasp. Even if they wanted to verify the results further, all they could tell was that it was a coincidence. You could propose that it might be possible to duplicate the results if they lost control of the mana and then adjusted accordingly, but that was a conclusion. But that was a conclusion. It was impossible to make conclusions about these results. They simply couldn't be duplicated. This was like seeing a lightning strike that just happened to carve a splendid sculpture and then trying to recreate it with human hands. So the rampaging mana stabilized itself. Basically, it was a miraculous coincidence. The fact that Chief Engineer von Schugel noted in the experiment report, quote, "We owe our success to the power of God," unquote, showed the extent of that miracle. Something that was by all rights impossible had occurred, and it just happened to do so beyond the reach of human understanding. Even Chief Engineer von Schugel, who created the Type 95, had given up on continuing development, saying, quote, "Going any further would be blasphemy, an insolent act in defiance of God," end quote. Even the hardcore techies concluded that you probably had to be chosen by God or something to use that computation orb, which goes to show how hard it had to be. So what does that mean? We're currently using something we don't understand without understanding it, and it hasn't been easy. In other words, that was about all they knew. Whether unraveling the principles behind the orb or reproducing it, a vast amount of time and effort would be required, and on top of that, their probability of success wasn't worth betting on, no matter how much they calculated it. It might be better to just glorify Lieutenant Degrachoff as a hero. I agree. That could help us out in a bigger way. Fortunately, Second Lieutenant Degrachoff had earned her Silver Wings assault badge at quite a young, frankly, tender age. Praising her abilities for publicity would be much easier than trying to show off the flawed orb. Cadet Corps Dormitory. I, Victoria Ivanova it's either Serbryakov or Serebryakov. In the anime, they referred to her as Serebryakov, but Serbryakov also sounds better to me. Plus, they shorthanded as Visha for most of the story, so I'll probably alternate between both pronunciations, but you get the picture. Anyway, continuing with the text. Visha! Get up! Visha! Ugh! Morning, Elia. Technically, that's because my gorgeous friend always wakes me up. The ever-kind Elia is taller than me, and she has curves in all the right places, even though she's so thin. Not only that, but she also doesn't get low blood pressure in the morning. She's always full of pep. I'm only a centimeter shorter than her, and just as slim. God is just so unfair. Elia and I have the same lifestyle, so I really don't get why certain parts of her body are so much more developed than mine. Maybe it's genetics, I don't know. Anyway, fresh out of the cadet corps wants to stay sound asleep. Anyone fresh out of the cadet corps wants to stay sound asleep in their warm beds as long as they possibly can. That's because one of the only fun things about cadet school is staying up all night chatting with your dorm buddies. Elia is one of the girls who really loves it. I go to bed before her pretty often. But then she always gets up earlier. How does that make sense? I guess it's just one of those differences between people. I can't do anything about it, no matter how hard I try. I probably sound like I hate my good-natured friend, but really I don't. In general, joining the cadet corps is voluntary. but anyone eligible to become a mage is basically forced to enlist and thrown into the fray. So this unlucky cadet was bound by the strictest rules and continually chewed out by demon drill sergeants. Of course I blamed God at the time, but I couldn't stay mad when I'd met such a great friend. Sadly, my time with my good buddy is scheduled to end today. It hasn't sunk in yet, but today we'll be assigned to our respective combat units. I hope we end up together, but that's probably too much to hope for. It's less like we're wearing our uniforms and more like our uniforms are wearing us, but we're still real soldiers. For whatever reason, fate gave us magical potential. And so we become Imperial Army mages, pride of the Reich. Well, technically, we're newbies. Before I knew it, I was tossed into the dormitory of the Western Army Group as a reinforcement for the Rhine front. My duty as a soldier is to serve indefatigably in the West as a shield for the beloved fatherland at this crucial juncture, or something to that effect. I'm an imperial subject too, I guess, so I do think maybe I should fight for my great country, but it doesn't feel quite right. Maybe that's only natural, since I was born in lovely snow-white Moscova. Well, the hazy remnants of my memory are just a torrent of red, which isn't very fun. My parents turned to relatives for help. We thankfully managed to escape the country, and that's my story. I was too young to really remember much, but I might be lacking qualifications compared to Imperial soldiers actually born here. That said, I'm so grateful to my aunt and uncle for taking me in. I'm second grateful to God for giving me my daily bread. Let's eat. Our diet here is different from the rear, but I already got used to it to the less than fresh vegetables and the canned goods you tend to find at NCO mess halls near the front. On the first day, I cried because the food tasted about as awful as combat rations, but lately I've been enjoying it just fine. Visha, did you hear that the platoon you're assigned to is getting a new leader? Mealtime is fun since we get to chat. Given the circumstances, it's no wonder we're interested in discussing our assignments. Really? Isn't that kind of a weird time to add a new platoon commander? It's definitely true. Elia, calm down. Of course, so much of the chatter is gossip. I hear that once you get to be a veteran, you can catch wind of your own assignment and your buddies, and I bet it's true. I bet it's true. But as you might imagine, mages fresh out of the cadet corps, mere NCOs, can't tell right from left in the army. Still, I'm interested in my assignment, and my friend has an uncanny ability to overhear things. But seriously, we're supposed to be reinforcements. Would they really make a whole new platoon on the front lines? At a time like this? Logically, no, but this has to be true. Visha, I heard personnel officers talking about it. I do wonder where Elia just happened to hear all this news. It isn't like they're elementary school teachers chatting about their classes. Would officers from personnel really discuss assignments in front of other people? I shouldn't overthink it. Elia, sometimes I wonder if you're a ninja or a spy from the Far East. A woman has her secrets, Miss Serebriakov. Well, whatever. So do you know where this new platoon will be deployed? Oh, so it's not a new platoon, but a replacement for one that got wiped out. You'll be okay, though. Supposedly the leader is a veteran with silver wings. For a second, I don't understand what she just said. I'm normally easygoing, but when I come to my senses, I'm so shocked I can't help getting a knee-jerk reaction. Silver wings? You mean the Silver Wings assault badge? Wow, your eyes are like saucers, what? Visha, your faces are always so funny. I'll have to thank her later for keeping her burst of laughter quiet so we don't draw attention from the other diners. But wow, someone who is still alive got the Silver Wings assault badge. An awesome Imperial soldier? More like an awesome human being. Oh joy. You must know about your own assignment too, right? Yup. I'll be supporting the artillery as part of an observation squad. Of course, I'll be making tea in the back. Hey, you never know what might happen if you're not careful. That said, the news that my friend will be somewhere safe makes me envious, but I'm still relieved. Uh-oh, if we keep lollygagging like this, our time will be up. Chow down, Visha. Yeah, you're right. Hey, where'd my caramel go? Oh, you hadn't eaten it yet, so I helped you. Yes, this maddening mischief maker is my precious friend, helping herself to my chocolate. A few days earlier, at the Imperial capital. Reassignment? I've been transferred away from the Technology Research Department and from being treated like a guinea pig as the dedicated tester of the Elenium Type 95 orb. Magic Second Lieutenant Tanya Digrichov has longer for this notice, waiting out days that felt like years, and is pleased as punch to accept. Her application must have finally been approved. My mind will be freed. I'll leave this place and head to the new posting immediately. Yes, a reassignment. Guess the brass isn't about to let an ace just hang around. You're going to be leader of the 3rd Platoon in the 205th Assault Mage Company. Considering resources are so low that even the instructor units have to join the battle, there's nothing I can do about ending up on the front lines. Actually, as someone fresh from the academy leading a platoon, even in the thick of battle, it's much better than getting abused as a guinea pig. Finally, I'll apparently have subordinates. Now I can delegate tasks I would have had to handle alone in the past. And in the worst case scenario, although I'd lose favor with the higher-ups, using them as human shields is a possibility. I mostly hope they aren't incompetent, but either way, this is a cause for celebration. And congratulations, Lieutenant. It's not much compared to the Silver Wings, but in recognition of your recent achievements, we have decided to award you the Aerial Assault Badge. Thank you, sir. Tanya gives a cheerful salute and smile that makes her look like the little girl she is. In high spirits, I return to the dormitory and set about packing luggage. Of course, soldiers don't have many personal possessions to begin with, but even though she's biologically female, Tanya feels that clean and neat is good enough for clothes. In fact, her uniforms are the only clothing she has. Since none of the existing sizes fit, she just has to apply for clothing allowance and get them made to order. Tailored uniforms. Wondrous. It takes less than an hour to pack my officer's bag. I briskly tell the manager of the dormitory, where I am staying during my temporary assignment, about the transfer. I show him my orders and thank him personally for taking care of me while I lived here. With that, my moving preparations are complete. Then I head straight for my designated unit. These are frontline orders. They require me to forego annoying social obligations like farewell parties and instead take up my position as quickly as possible. Hence, after receiving permission to fly from the Air Defense Identification Zone, I immediately take my bag and race across the sky towards the designated rendezvous point. Fortunately, though the Army is facing a crisis, this is still only moving between bases in the rear. The short flight ends without incident, and less than 2 hours after my departure, I arrive and present myself to my new company commander. Magic Second Lieutenant Tanya Degorichov, leader of the 3rd Platoon of the 205th Assault Mage Company, reporting for duty. Thank you for coming, Lieutenant. First, allow me to welcome you. I am Company Commander 1st Lieutenant Ichlin Schwarzkopf. Or is it... No. First Lieutenant Ichlin Schwarzkopf. There we go. He confirms that I've arrived as ordered and completes assignment procedures as he welcomes me. While keeping things businesslike in adherence to military regulations, we casually appraise each other. We're both soldiers, and soldiers don't get to choose their allies. Thus, it's logical to assume that they won't last long on the battlefield if they don't at least get to know one another. Commander Schwarzkopf, sir. Pleased to be serving under you. Great. Let's get to it, Lieutenant Degrichov. Do you have any experience leading platoon? One thing that makes Tanya happy at a glance is that her commanding officer appears to be an extremely orthodox mage. He is a first lieutenant. Judging from his age, he has probably served a decent amount of time, and from the medals he's wearing, it's easy to gather that he has a wealth of combat experience. The decorations commanding his participation in several minor conflicts, especially, provide a certain level of assurance. So my first impression is he isn't an inept superior, which would be scarier than the enemy, quite frankly. Since I can't choose my commanding officer, if he ends up being like the legendary soldier who ruined the Burma-Imphal front, I may decide to take action and mourn the ensuing unfortunate accident, shall we say. This will be my first time, sir. Schwarzkopf is also observing Degrachov. He can't deny being a bit puzzled to see a little girl appear before him in the company commander's office. All he has heard from above is that they would send him a mage from an instructor unit at Central who has combat experience on the Northern Front. Schwarzkopf figured they would give him a seasoned veteran. It's safe to assume that a second lieutenant from an instructor unit would have worked up from non-commissioned officer status, and a veteran should be reliable in any situation. Plus, as a recipient of the Silver Wings Assault Badge, whomever the brass sent would have to be a capable soldier with a wealth of combat experience. That's why when Schwarzkopf laid eyes on this kid, younger than his own daughter, announcing her arrival with a perfect salute, he wondered what he'll do with the difficult platoon. His original intent to give her the command had relied on his expectation that she would be a veteran. Lieutenant, I'll be frank. If the records don't lie, and there isn't any mistake, the second lieutenant waiting at attention for him to speak is a significant asset who has splendidly distinguished herself in battle, and she had been dispatched to deal with the worsening situation on the Western Front. But being a great athlete is different from being a great coach, and Schwarzkopf fears this situation is similar. The 205th Mage Company is meant to have 3 platoons, but during the early days of the war, our numbers dropped to less than 2. We've barely been operating undermanned ever since. To replace the lost men, a new platoon commander and fresh members have been assigned to the company. Schwarzkopf knows he can't complain, even if every member of the platoon is a raw recruit, but that's precisely why he hoped the leader would be an experienced veteran. Can you command a platoon of recruits straight out of the cadet corps? To cast the situation as it currently stands in a pessimistic light, the platoon will consist of a child leading greenhorns. It would be not only ineffective, but also a deadweight, worse than deadweight. Needless to say, if the Empire's forces could simultaneously babysit and wage war, they wouldn't be having such a hard time. He asks the question partially out of doubt. Whether an immediate change in personnel is necessary or not will depend on her answer. Degrachov's response is simple. Please give me the order. She keeps her reply curt and speaks in an even, matter-of-fact tone. Yet her eyes shine back at Schwarzkopf with nearly arrogant pride, rejecting his misgivings about her abilities. I will give you results. Her reply also shows her unfaltering self-confidence. It surpasses his expectations. The first step towards trust is believing that if this combat veteran says, "Give me the order will be carried out." Well, you've gotten the Silver Wings Assault Badge. I'm expecting a lot out of you. Yes, sir. A living recipient of the Silver Wings Assault Badge from the instructor unit is worthy of that much trust. Tanya, for her part, surmises that Schwarzkopf only accepted her response because of the decoration she's wearing. In other words, the entire worth of Second Lieutenant Tanya Degrachov can be summed up with one badge. In that sense, she's truly grateful to have received the Silver Wings. Apart from the white-silver moniker that comes with it, which I never wanted in the first place and am more eager to get rid of, and the sanity checks it forces upon me, nothing about my current situation is harmful, and I have a good reputation. Well, I should probably welcome this. Beneath the face of a soldier, Tanya is calculating. Goodwill and praise are better than hostility and insult, at least. All right, I'll go ahead and explain the situation. Yes, sir. Having gotten more or less good impressions, they decide for the present to trust each other enough that they can focus on their respective jobs. Next, it's some time for work. As you know, the Great Army's main forces are urgently being reorganized and assembled. The Empire has fallen into disorder in the immediate aftermath of the Franco-Republic's surprise attack. But overall, it's mostly held its own in the early battles. That doesn't change the fact that the troops are under pressure, but the national defense policy calls for interior line strategy. In that case, though it's true the Western Army Group has received reinforcements, 4 remaining units at Central, they have completely fulfilled their duty of delaying the enemy. While that is the case, it will take some time to reach the Western Front. That's only one problem. The reserves and standing troops, who are supposed to be the counterblow, have all been invested in the North. The top general staff members wanted to resolve the Norden issue with one final push, but the original national defense plan is falling apart. All the Western Army Group can do is hope that they arrive soon, but we have to assume they will take a while. Originally, the plan called for Central to send 3 divisions within 24 hours of mobilization orders, including 1 Imperial Guard division as the vanguard of the invasion, and within 72 hours, 7 more divisions to follow. Okay, I'm going to reread that. Originally, the plan called for Central to send 3 divisions within 24 hours of mobilization orders, including 1 Imperial Guard division as vanguard, and within 72 hours, 7 more divisions to follow. Within a week or so, the Great Army itself would invest an overwhelming force, 20 divisions of their dignified regular troops, and enough reserves for 60 divisions. That's why the Western Army Group never imagined a need to slow down the enemy on their own for a month. And of course, since they don't have the reinforcements for the plan, even if they only fight to delay, they'll have to do it in a way that minimizes their casualties. The only plan the Western Army Group had prepared is a defensive battle limited to large-scale resistance. The General Staff forgot that while investing the Great Army in Norden, the General Staff forgot that while investing the Great Army in Norden, and the price has been higher than anyone imagined. The fact that the higher-ups have mobilized the instructor units in an attempt to establish a Western defensive line shows how panicked they are. They even sent out the Elenium Type 95, a military secret that wasn't supposed to leave the lab until under the pretext of continued evaluation with Tanya. Really, they just wanted the muscle. They were getting desperate. Perhaps the rapidly changing war situation gave them no choice, but if they're in such miserable turmoil that they can't prioritize confidentiality, there's no way they can carry out the defensive plan as it was originally envisioned. The Great Army, the main Imperial attacking force, was deployed to the north in its entirety due to an error in strategic judgment. Even if it only took a short time to reorganize and redeploy the troops, that was far too long from a military perspective. How is assembling the Great Army going? It's obvious that their difficulties stem from the lack of a plan for this unforeseen need to deploy troops. Even a minutely calculated operation is difficult to execute without hitches, so handling this situation off the cuff seems nigh impossible. Inevitably, the current pace of assembly is not ideal. In this situation, the delay of reinforcements and ensuing impact of the front are matters of life and death for the Western Army Group, as well as critical concerns for the Imperial soldiers who have to suffer the brunt of the attack before the Great Army arrives. Not good. They're short of vehicles in the north, so they need about 2 weeks to redeploy the units to the west. Schwarzkopf seems to doubt they'll really be only 2 weeks late. Experience has taught him that headquarters always gives optimistic estimates when it comes to the number of reinforcements and their arrival time. Redeployment sounds simple enough, but it involves more than just reorganizing the units and setting up a new chain of command. The units need to be replenished and resupplied before they can go anywhere. It's no easy feat. Just transporting an army consumes vast amounts of resources, not only fuel and supplies, but also intangibles such as a soldier's energy. They get tired out there. That's why Tanya isn't surprised when her superior matter-of-factly explains, "We've given up on delaying along the western line. We're switching to mobile defense." Once you determine that buying time won't cut it, adopting a mobile defense strategy is a natural step. Normally, you would base the troops in rear locations that are reinforced against long-distance enemy artillery, and use the distance you withdrew during the delaying battle for defense in depth. Lieutenant, I doubt I need to say this to you, but this is a classic example of something easier said than done. Yes, sir, I understand. The original interior line strategy called for the defensive line to obstruct the enemy's advance, and for the Great Army's reinforcements to surround and annihilate the forces that have penetrated too deeply into Imperial territory. But that line had already collapsed, and they're now fighting a defensive battle on thin ice, which is not much fun at all, to say the least. Probably the only enjoyable defensive battle would have been the one fought behind the famous Maginot Line. Okay, editor's note. France put a significant amount of money into its defensive budget, approximately 3.3 billion francs in the year 1930, which, adjusted for inflation, would be a considerably higher number today. To construct this defensive line, the sad thing was that Germany went around... they did that to construct the... Maginot Line. France put a significant amount of money into a defensive budget, in brackets, 3.3 billion francs in the year 1930, close bracket, to construct this defensive line. The sad thing was that Germany went right around it, so the units holding it were unable to participate in the war in a meaningful way. Though they did bang up jobs securing the Maginot Line, the enemy chose to go through the Ardennes and Low Countries to wallop them. What a pitiful fort. It's a classic example of how even a great idea needs great execution to be any good. So, yeah, the long and the short of it is they bypassed the Maginot Line by invading Belgium, which in our timeline brought the British into the war because they had an alliance with the British. But that's not the case in this universe, so hypothetically that could still work. But again, Plan 315 and the Schlieffen Plan are related in this as well. Now, returning to the text. Maginot Line. Here we are. Probably the only enjoyable defensive battle would have been the one fought behind the famous Maginot Line, perfect for shut-ins. You could have just holed up in it and waited for the war to end. To Tanya, this is a problem that goes deeper than a strategic level failure. If you're planning on fighting using attritional containment tactics, then it would probably have dawned on you to tighten up your borders and with forts instead of going for a strategy that will fail before the fighting even begins. If command actually assumed that the Franco Republic would be content to overlook the threat of their exterior line strategy collapsing upon the defeat of the Entente alliance, that naivete would leave Tanya dumbstruck. Lower-ranking soldiers like Tanya and Schwarzkopf are stuck paying the price for that miscalculation in blood, which is something they can't tolerate. We are soldiers. If the brass tells us to do something, we do it. A parrot might argue that the nation's leading strategists work against the country by dint of their own incompetence. Tanya doesn't house even the slightest intention of dying for the empire. I always have to make exemplary remarks that go against what I truly feel, acting out the expected role to help myself succeed. To that end, I would even give a Tsungin-esque, editor's note. In Japanese, Tsujin-kyu, Tsujin-kyo, a joke about the awful tactical planner Masanobu Tsuji. It's used for people who are only halfway competent. Due to his ability to take action and his, for better or worse, inflated pride, in a nutshell, he was toxic. His collection of arbitrary actions teaches us how important discipline is to military units. Even so, he was never punished and actually rose in rank. The world is full of injustice. People who rise, but who never deserve what they achieve. Anyway, returning to the text. To that end, I would even give a Tsungen-esque speech, though I despise his incompetence. If it came down to it, I would even shout, patriotism is not a crime. I can blather about those things as naturally as breathing, and that plus Tanya's doll-like appearance is enough to suggest my patriotism to anyone listening. Most importantly, the majority of soldiers detest the idealists throwing around words like patriotism and brave loyalty in the rear. But to them, on the front, the sentiment of loving one's country is sacred. Combat veterans who've earned their praise in the field swear to defend their country. In extreme conditions, they treat that vow as a declaration of faith. Faith not in God, but in the state. Quite right, Lieutenant Degrichov. Thus, the model imperial soldier is one who's indifferently completes their missions in adherence to mission-oriented war doctrine. And those qualities are praised. Good. Back to the topic at hand, then. Yes, sir. We must at least be able to tell that I'm not inept. With a deep sense of satisfaction, Schwarzkopf is able to relax a bit. The situation is unpleasant, to be sure, but he's a good asset. He has to take units that were mobilized at the last minute with no clear strategic direction and fight a defensive battle. He's lost a great number of his already harried troops. The replacements are deadweight recruits, and their leader is a little girl? For just a moment, he feels like looking to the heavens in despair, but for Schwarzkopf, the mere fact that Degrichov is an officer who can get things done makes her one of his few valuable resources. Age be damned. The 205th Assault Mage Company has been selected as a mobile strike force in the mobile defense battle. Schwarzkopf and his company's skills fighting and finessing during the initial battles have landed them on the mobile strike duty. Their job is to rush around putting out fires, and it will require playing more roles than ordinary units do. We are the linchpin of this counterattack. That's a big responsibility for us to share. I look forward to seeing what you're made of out there. Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll do my best to protect the fatherland. Tanya looks at Schwarzkopf with his innocent blue eyes and speaks of noble ideals and contributing to the nation with her childlike lips. I'll read that again. Tanya looks at Schwarzkopf with her innocent blue eyes and speaks of noble ideals and contributing to the nation with her childlike lips. Of course, Tanya's words don't have an iota of sincerity. I just know it's a line someone in her position should say. Tanya knows how awful the trenches are, even if my resources are war films and books from another universe. So she's happy to be a counterattack reserve instead of stuck in one of them. Certainly, holing up in some field works fortified with reinforced concrete seems like the safer option at a glance. I can understand why amateurs would think that. The invention of the machine gun gave defense the advantage, and to anyone who knows that, the defensive position is unquestionably strong. No one ordered by General Nogi to capture Port Arthur with swords would hesitate to make an accident happen. Humans are much frailer than concrete and iron. At the same time, it's important to remember that the base at Port Arthur was destroyed by heavy naval artillery. Fortifications on a battlefield have the fatal structural flaw of being immobile. History teaches us that no matter how sturdy the fortress, before siege artillery, it is nothing but another target. Given the previous point, Tanya knows that being part of a mobile unit out in the field, where they can run anywhere they need to, in a pinch is safer. Even a mage can't attack a well-defended stronghold at close range and get off easily, but I also know that a stronghold will get pummeled by artillery and fall in the long run. And I'm also aware that attacking the enemy vanguard is safer, if only in comparison, since they'll be exhausted from breaking through the defensive line. Thus, Tanya makes false declarations of loyalty, while the only thing she truly welcomes with joy is her assignment. Raising her chances of survival even just a little is undoubtedly a happy occurrence. Great. Any questions? Yes, sir. Will we be sorting from the defensive line of the rear? Defensive line or the rear? There's one point worth bearing in mind. Mobile strike forces come in two types. One is positioned in the rear and responds quickly to seal enemy breaches. The other sets off for a forward position to catch up with the enemy around their backside. The difference between the two is whether you can kick back and relax as counterattacking personnel in the rear, or have to dig trenches and build fortifications while under the constant threat of enemy bombardment. They comprise two completely different environments. Of course, the unit that has to seal the breaches will take some damage, since they do have to charge up in the front lines. But generally speaking, the act of launching a counteroffensive in the first place usually means they get to enjoy numerical superiority. In other words, I won't need to worry about being sent on counterattacks if the situation is overwhelmingly bad. Rejoice, Lieutenant. We shall be on the forwardmost line. What an honor. This is the worst. Mobile strike personnel on the front, meaning they would have to defend the line and double as distraction during the counterattack. No number of lives could be enough. If she were defending from a trench, she could use the nearest people as human shields, but she couldn't do that if she leaves the lines to be a decoy. Piercing the enemy with the guys from the rear might sound great, but we would only be glorified targets. I never doubted that would make you happy. We may also need to help defend the strong points, depending on what the situation calls for. As expected. Should I be happy? I'm not thrilled that my ominous hunch was right on the money. As a way to hone my crisis management skills, this assignment won't be bad, but I would rather never have needed to use them. So we'll prioritize mobile strike operations, but also support the defensive line? That's correct. Am I supposed to just accept my fate? Let myself be exploited as part of the mobile strike force after being stuck on the line? There should be a limit to how much you can overwork someone. I'd like to demand better working conditions, or at the very least an increase in base pay. Of course, I don't have any problem with performing duties covered by my contract, but this is a bit much. I'd like to be adequately compensated. However, our mission isn't to eliminate the enemy, just to repulse him. We don't need to bend over backwards to surround and annihilate them. This is the worst. Assembling the great army must be going rough. Oh, you can tell? If we make our only objective to delay the enemy forces and don't adopt a mobile defense aiming to exhaust them, then we won't last long enough. Even the stupidest freshly minted officer could see that. They couldn't possibly conduct a successful delay defense along the whole huge front. Without using a mobile defense strategy to exhaust the enemy's forces, it would be impossible to suppress the enemy. Things are so dire that the Empire would have to risk allowing raiders to get through at one location and attack them there. At least they would be organized, so it probably wouldn't be as much of a disaster as the latter days on the Eastern Front in World War I. But I still have to brace myself. That's one way to put it. Well, there's no cheerful way to fight a war, anyway. Here's who is in your platoon. Thank you, sir. Tanya takes a mental deep breath and looks over the list of her first subordinates ever. But it's so ridiculous it makes her brain freeze up. It dawns on her that she's reeling. The only reason she doesn't instinctively hurl the document away is due to excessive shock, rather than a triumph of reason. In other words, her thoughts would be, This is too much. My understanding was that there was a general lack of key personnel in the Western Army Group, and that because of this, the only replacements we could get for the 3rd Platoon were rookies with 0 experience. But I have to correct myself. Perhaps we should call them untrained recruits. I see no problem with that. That means your platoon will be extremely rough around the edges. I want you to make defending the position your main duty. These mages have only completed Cadet Corps basic training, and we are rushing them into a combat unit? Anyone with half a notion of how mage battles work would laugh at it. and brush it off as an April Fool's joke. With 4 to a platoon and 12 in a company, mage teams prioritize skills over numbers more than anyone else. Even someone with innate mage potential would only be in the way to a newbie with nothing more than basic training. This is like taking a guy with only the most basic army rules and regulations beaten into him, putting him in a plane, and telling him to fly. It'll be worse than a turkey shoot. I see, by having us on defense, he's telling me that he doesn't consider them fit for combat. It'd be irrational to expect anything out of this unit, so it's a valid conclusion. Commander, a humble suggestion, as platoon leader if I may. Lieutenant Degrechav, I realize fighting a war while babysitting is a lot to ask, although it's weird to say that to you. He glances at her small, slight frame. I have to say that, frankly, I would be more useful fighting solo than in that platoon. I get the platoon lacks training, but you're telling me to make it a stationary force? They can't handle mobile battles, so you're telling me to defend the base while re-educating and training them? Isn't that the same as ordering me to let the incompetent hold me back? Tanya's vehemently protests this crisis with indescribable rage. Unless the regulations that she learned at the Army Academy had been revised, childcare is definitely not in a soldier's job description. It would be safer to hurl these novices into no man's land and free myself of the burden. Maybe I should do that if I get a chance. No, I can't judge them without even meeting them. As an officer, I have no plans to abandon my duties to my comrades, but I hope you will consider the way to use our forces most efficiently. These guys are backup. If the situation calls for it and the timing works out, we'll send you on guerrilla missions. Even though he wanted her to whip the platoon into shape, he is implying from the start that he will send Tanya on her own if necessary. Understood. Are we permitted to abandon our position if need be? Regrettably, we can't pull back the lines any further, so we have to hold it. Commander says we can choose victory or Valhalla. Okay, editor's note. Valhalla, the place where the souls of those who fell in battle join the souls of past heroes. In other words, having to choose between victory or Valhalla means choosing to win or to die. Most will end up in Valhalla anyway. Valhalla is also basically the de facto heaven of the Viking religions of Northern Europe. Anyway, continuing. Victory or Valhalla, is that even a choice? It's just a roundabout way of ordering us to die on the line. No, it's not even roundabout. It's just narcissistic bullshit. Why should I die for other people? If someone wants to die for me, that's their prerogative, but forcing me to die completely violates my free will. Freedom reigns supreme. We can be democratic, nationalist, or even imperialist so long as I'm free. So please, stop issuing war bonds. Financing the war by printing bonds under the assumption the empire will win just guarantees hyperinflation no matter how the war ends. Win or lose, I can only imagine the future will be a barrel of fun. How utterly unpleasant. The sarcasm in her voice was very clear. Splendid. Both options sound great. Fantastic. Then I'll introduce you to your platoon. Okay. Time to greet my allies in this miserable war. If they happen to be in the right place at the right time, I might even use them as human shields, so I have to expect a lot out of them. And so, though neither of them wanted to, the young lady and the little girl would slurp the same sludge and nibble biscuits so hard they had to chip them apart with bayonets before they could eat them, fighting side by side on the Western Front under a shower of shells. My first impression of my superior, Imperial Army Officer 2nd Lieutenant Tanya Degrechav of the Western Front Mobile Strike Army 7th Assault Group 205th Assault Mage Company, was vampire. Her skin was so white she looked sick, and her sharp eyes seemed to loathe the sun. It was quite a shock. The first time I saw her, First Lieutenant Schwarzkopf had ordered us to assemble, and as we were standing by, a little kid who looked bizarrely comfortable in her uniform showed up. She couldn't have been a student from the cadet corps. She wasn't even old enough to enroll. The cap sitting atop her messily tied hair was far too big for her. Any normal soldier who saw her wearing the rank of second lieutenant would have done a double take. When the company commander introduced her to us, though, I didn't feel like anything was off about Lieutenant Degrichov. I couldn't quite explain it, but it was like she fit right in. Still, the moment she turned her icy, cold eyes on us, like we were objects to be appraised, I shrank from her in spite of myself. People might laugh at me for being afraid of such a little kid, but those eyes reminded me of the way a cat looks when it's playing with a mouse, which creeped me out, to say the least. Just like Elia had said, Lieutenant Degrichov was a veteran ace who had earned numerous decorations for her distinguished service, not the least of which was the Silver Wings Assault Badge. She had a thick aura of battle around her, and her face was almost doll-like. It was so pleasant to look at. Vacant blue eyes, blonde hair tinged dark gray. Maybe it was partly because we didn't get much sun on the Rhine front, but I noticed in my head that she looked just like a vampire. She urged us, in a calm, businesslike tone that left no room for misunderstanding, to state our rank, name, and where we last served. And I felt, just a little bit, like I wanted to get out of there. The cadet corps had a simple method of categorizing cadets. The army knew very well that volunteers and conscripts wouldn't be on the same wavelength, even if they trained together, so they divided the mages into two classes from the start. Battalion C was expected to eventually train as officers at the academy, and Battalion D would just complete their compulsory service. My two platoon mates were elites for Battalion C. Corporal Kirst von Walchorf from Idalstein Battalion C, 1st Company. Corporal Harold von Fist, also from Idalstein Battalion C, 1st Company. I gave my rank and my name after the two cadet corps volunteers. I didn't wish I had volunteered exactly, but it was sort of a bummer to say I was drafted right after people who announced that they had offered their services to their country. I couldn't just not care like Elia. I was thick-skinned enough to just laugh it off. Oh God, why must you torment me? Corporal Victoria Ivanova Serebriakov from Adalstein Battalion D, 3rd Company. You could say I felt a bit out of place as the only conscript. I mean, Corporals Kirst and Harold were volunteers from the same company. If we did things the usual way, that meant the two guys with experience working together would be buddies, and I'd get paired with the platoon leader. That was why I was thinking, as I reported, that it could be great if I didn't get chewed out for being a slow, lazy draftee, so I was momentarily stunned by what the second lieutenant said next. You have my respect for fulfilling your obligations, Corporal Victoria Ivanova Serebriakov. It'll be tough, but do your best to survive. Unexpected words of encouragement, and from an officer I was convinced was so cold, with those eyes more warlike than any I'd ever seen. For a second, I couldn't understand what had happened and froze. Meanwhile, then to the fellows who enlisted of your own free will. Since you volunteered, you'd better not die after Corporal Serebriakov and me. Her calm tone hadn't changed. She didn't raise her voice, but the words she spoke with that emotionless expression were incredibly heavy. First, I'll make one thing clear. The Empire doesn't have the time or resources to support inept officer candidates. In fact, doing so would be counterproductive. She was different from all the drill sergeants. The way she talked, it was almost like she was a different species of imperial soldier. Her values ran counter to the ones that had been pounded into me since I'd joined the army. It'd be a different story if you were forced to serve against your will because the nation needs you. But you're the ones who got in line to don the uniform of the fatherland, so contribute accordingly. If you are too inept to do that, then die. She must have said all she wanted to say to us speechless, frozen recruits. After telling the company commander that was all, she immediately kicked up outside because we were still just standing there. Before we knew it, though we'd only just arrived, we'd been hurled into the trenches and were getting showered with periodic deliveries, shall we say, of ordnance from the Republican Army. What awaited us there was a re-evaluation of our basic skills as mages. We learned that not only were we not earning our salaries, we were worse than garbage. Having been thus straightened out, Corporal Kirst and Harold became rebellious, but they weren't disciplined outright. Key word, outright. After the company commander and the second lieutenant mentioned that they simply couldn't take care of them on the front lines, the pair were assigned to the rear. After that introduction and a bit of action, I became Lieutenant Degrachaf's buddy as the sole member of her platoon, and we grew together, and we flew together. Meanwhile, the two other cadets were transferred to a better position. They were double promoted and assigned to defend the company's base in the rear. They could stay safe inside a pillbox as reserves and prepare for the counteroffensive. One thing I learned while flying, though, was that, for artillery, an immobile pillbox is nothing but a sturdy target. It was when we received orders to flank the Republican unit trying to breach the line, while we were under suppressive fire by their supporting heavy artillery. Half in tears, thinking I would never make it out of there alive, I followed the senior members of the company, who were grinning as they charged. I saw a base get blown to smithereens, while we got off without so much as a scratch. Weirdly, not only did barely any shells come our way, but also we didn't suffer any real losses at all before we made contact. After experiencing this over and over, I realized that artillery needs to be used systematically. It made sense when I thought about it. Machine guns had a better chance of hitting aircraft than artillery. As long as you didn't stumble upon an anti-air cannon position, the only things shooting aircraft were machine guns. Although mages were slower than planes, we were still far too fast for the artillery to take their time aiming. It would probably be a different story if we assaulted a firing position or a pillbox and took heavy zoned fire, but we were taught that when fighting on our own territory, speed is everything. I was lucky enough to learn from Lieutenant Degrachoff and Schwarzkopf that the more experienced you get as a mage, the more suspicious you get about defending a fixed position. In short, artillery is the god we must trust on the battlefield. It's also the god we should never anger. You can't survive unless you make this god your ally and learn how to avoid its iron hammer. Maybe that was why my leader is a dyed-in-the-wool believer in firepower, the perfect embodiment of non-negotiable mobile warfare, and then a mage after that. The only faith she had rests with artillery. Could soldiers, by nature, a group of realists, believe in God? Her answer to the question was pretty interesting. When I wrote to Elia about it, she wrote back, "Then I am the war goddess in charge of divine will." That answer was like her. It made me smile. She had a way with words. We had eyes and ears, so the devout believers crouching on the front line, in the trenches and in gun nests, were promised the divine revelations of the artillery. With the contribution of the observers, we could call for fire to break up an enemy charge or bombardment, depending on the crisis. It reminded me of Elia, smiling about her easy job where she would hang out and drink tea. But she was always the nurturing, helpful type, so I was sure her sense of responsibility kicked in and she was hard at work. Right before we went on an airborne assault, what the company wished for most of all was supporting fire from the artillery. Whenever we received orders to counterattack the Republican Army breaking through our defensive line, we attacked its flanks in sync with the artillery's fire to break up the offensive. I was used to battle now. My old job as a newbie was to follow Lieutenant Degrachoff as she raced ahead. Ideally, we were supposed to be partners, but our commander laughed and said I still needed more training. Oh, praise be to God, his name is Artillery. That's about right, isn't it? A wonderful sound? First Lieutenant Schwarzkopf beamed, praising the artillery as their shells rained down with perfect timing. Our taste in music seems a tad different. I'm only just able to get through these intense bombardments without the sound freaking me out. Yes, it is God of the battlefield, God has answered our radio requests. Artillery, artillery, thou art our friend, thou art our savior. The blasphemy continued. The ones carrying on, relaxing their scary frowns, were the intense but dependable old hands from 1st Platoon. Although their opinion that artillery was our savior was a little dramatic, I was learning that it wasn't entirely wrong. We may have been a counterattacking unit, but half of our job was to contain the enemy so the artillery could finish them off. If we just surrounded them, the rabble, an advancing unit, a defensive unit, or even enemy artillery, the artillery would naturally destroy everything. Witnessing it just once was enough to make you want to pray, "Dear God, please grant me artillery support." The artillery prep prior to an assault was always reassuring for inconsolable, fearful hearts. One time, our support ran late, so our battalion-sized unit, containing various different mage companies, had to go at it with an enemy echelon. Editor's note: echelon. A special term used in the military. During an assault, the foremost party was the first echelon. The one behind them was the second echelon. The term was often used when arranging various military units. Sort of like the vanguard of the invasion, I suppose, would be the first echelon. Anyway, interesting, but let us continue. Here we are. One time our support ran late, so our battalion-sized unit, containing various different mage companies, had to go at it with an echelon, and a bunch of other things I don't really want to remember happened. On that note, when there was enough support and enough space between the front and the rear, the weight of combat would grow lighter. Yes, looks like I'll survive again. As Tanya gazes at the enemy units through her binoculars, shells plow the earth right where they were meant to, turning people into fertilizer. In other words, this is the correct way of waging war, taking organic life and rendering it past tense through the units of ammunitions. The concentrated fire of a 120mm artillery shell really is a spectacular sight, sir. Amen. Truly, Lieutenant. Must be the teamwork between a talented observer and the artillery. They're wasting no time before firing for effect. People in any situation find it easier to remain calm as long as things go smoothly, and apparently those in the battlefield are no exception. The edifying teachings of the Chicago School say that all things can be measured using economics, but it's tricky to measure and quantify the effects on health when things go according to plan. When everything is on track, with redundancy limited and no additional costs incurred, it's just wonderful, simply glorious. The situation unfolding before the 205th Assault Mage Company is a perfect example. Just as First Lieutenant Schwarzkopf had said, the artillery is performing admirably. They must be coordinating quite closely. The way they transition from establishing a calibrating shot to firing for effect is only a few shells. In only a few shells shows magnificent skill. Magnificent skill. Thanks in part to that, by the time the company arrives at their attack position, the enemy army is already collapsing under the artillery's thorough barrage. Normally, there would be a chance of retaliatory fire and an artillery duel, but it seems the enemy's guns are busy with the suppressive fire from our forward position. Lucky us. Our corpse-level artillery blew up the enemy troops with 120mm shells, and we just have to mop up the surviving remnants. Yes, indeed. It was just as Schwarzkopf had said. The company is in luck. For Second Lieutenant Tanya Degrichov, it's a great day for war. All we need to do is take out the decimated enemy infantry on a battlefield they already have the advantage on. A simple, convenient mission. It's almost time, company. Prepare to attack. We're going to hunt down the ones the artillery missed. And so, following her commander's orders, Tanya shouldered her rifle, loaded with formula-imbued bullets, grabbed her computation orb, and prepares for the assault. The company is on standby, and aware they'll be charging, but right before they leave, even experienced veterans can't help but get anxious. The nervous swallows are a familiar sound in the trenches. distinctly audible over even the shells exploding nearby. Let's get to work, people. If only every time could be this much fun. For Tanya, being able to fight against the dregs of infantry ravaged by artillery fire under the lead of a competent officer like Schwarzkopf is great. Well, relatively. People don't fight wars because they want to. Asked if she considers herself happy, and you'd learn everything you needed from the string of expletives directed at being X for hurling such a young, innocent child onto this random battlefield. Still, she had to be objective, so it wasn't a mistake to welcome a less awful situation. Lieutenant, don't be a picky eater, or you'll never grow any taller. Commander Schwarzkopf, I rather like having a smaller surface area since it makes me less likely to get shot. You win, Lieutenant. That's the best excuse for being a picky eater I've ever heard. For Schwarzkopf, who is waiting for the right moment to launch the strike, the banter with Degrichov is opportune. You don't have to look back at history to know that commanders at all levels consider managing pre-assault stress part of making the job go smoothly. Schwarzkopf's 205th Assault Mage Company may have been veterans of the Rhine front, but even they still tensed up the moment before an attack. So when the light jokes relaxed everyone to the same extent, the lieutenant chose that moment to move them out. He alerts the artillery units that they are launching the assault. Once he gets the go-ahead from control, the operation is a go. Okay, everyone. Don't let picky Lieutenant Degrichov hog all the good stuff. Thanking God that the company is able to remain calm and chuckle in the face of the enemy, First Lieutenant Schwarzkopf roars with a well-trained voice. Charge! On me! On me! Everyone soars from their assault positions and rushes the enemy troops at a reckless speed. To unprotected infantry, rapid approaching mages are a threat just as serious as artillery. Mages have protective films and defensive shells, so a few shots aren't enough to take them down. On top of that, they have no trouble unleashing firepower more intense than heavy weaponry. They are truly tough opponents. There are a limited number of ways to effectively counter those dreadful mages. One is grenades. If you're lucky, a mage will come into range, and that's it. The best way is to intercept them with a concentrated barrage of fire. Apart from that, infantry units just don't have many options. So from the perspective of the enemy army, whose command structure is already in disarray due to the shelling, even an undermanned company of only about 10 mages is a terrifying threat. They probably already have direct support mages to fight fire with fire, but even mages have a hard time on the receiving end of artillery shells. Lucky for the Imperial Company, unlucky for the Republican Army. The Empire's 120mm guns connected with the flying Republican mages, turning them into mincemeat and littering the ground. Make sure to target enemy commanders and communications first. Isn't that obvious, Tanya thinks to herself, targeting a group of soldiers who seem to be carrying the distinctive backpack-style radios? Like the other company members, she uses an explosion formula to greet their uninvited Republican guests with the warm, welcome embrace of fire and steel. Judging from the sporadic returning fire, resistance is weak. At most, there is only a handful of isolated soldiers shooting at random. The majority have already given up and turned tail. So all we have to do is sweep through. Normally, potential enemy reinforcements would be a concern, but this time, a mixed group containing another artillery unit and a mobile strike team have already taken care of them. The current mission is just mopping up the remaining infantry. That gives Tanya enough leeway to keep a close eye on Corporal Serebryakov's combat performance. Whereas before she was only able to make sure her subordinate was still behind her, even under rifle fire, she never drops her defensive shell. Her maneuvers are still textbook, but compared to a month ago, she moves like a totally different mage. The amount of progress isn't half bad. I can't help but recall Lieutenant Schwarzkopf's comment that this is a combat exercise using the beat-up dregs of their collapsing enemy as targets. Actual combat really is the best training. And just think, not so long ago they were turning green and puking everywhere. It's amazing what you can do with a bit of training. Never underestimate human potential. Remembering that lesson once again, Tanya can't help but ponder the sacredness of human dignity and free will. For that reason, she pities the Republican soldiers. What an outdated mess their headquarters must be to have ordered them to charge into so much iron. It was demonstrated to the whole world 10 years ago during a conflict in the Far East between the Federation and the Dominion that iron dominates flesh. Okay, that's an interesting reference within the context of this universe. I'm not sure what they're referencing in our timeline, but we will continue and eventually it will likely be explained. Anyhow, this is the horrifying thing about people who lack initiative. No initiative basically necessitates loss to potential. So it's a sad irony that they took human resources that probably did have initiative, an abundance of human capital, and exported them to the Empire as mincemeat. It was to the point where I wanted to ask if they maybe shouldn't rethink a bit and recognize the value of the human capital according to the market principle. Unfortunately, everyone in the world is bound by contracts. As an imperial soldier, the relationship between Tanya and the Republican invaders is kill or be killed. It's fine and dandy for every country's propaganda to praise the noble act of dying for your fatherland. But I really wish people would understand the utterly obvious flip side, that they have to kill their fatherland's enemies too. In terms of precious human resources wasted, there's no greater crime than war, laments Second Lieutenant Tanya Degrichov, having just robbed several young people of their futures with a magic formula. Things just never turn out how you'd like, she thinks to herself, as her formulas mercilessly turn the fleeing Republican Army's soldiers into organic debris. The only word for this is wasteful. Even though it isn't her own country, Tanya can't escape the feeling that something is inherently wrong with squandering so many trained youths. Ah, I see why extravagance is the enemy, and that's in quotes, extravagance is the enemy. Of course, one of the ironies of history, in a sense, is that a certain country adopted that slogan and then wasted their human resources. Perhaps there will always be inept leaders frittling away in the lives of their most promising patriots. Geez, maybe I should focus a little more on the battlefield. Artillery plows, mages descend, and the infantry advances. I remember learning that on a nice afternoon when I would rather have been sunbathing than struggling to stay awake in a lecture on the history of warfare. But when exactly that was, I don't remember. Back in the cadet corps, the lessons seemed so ordinary as I sleepily listened, but once they became real life, it was horrible. Lieutenant Degrichov had this disheartened look on her face, but she still unleashed a swift, merciless storm of destruction. I was half impressed at her superb, superhuman abilities, and half simply stunned. It was all I could do just to fly after her, but she managed to handle even the enemies coming after me without taking a single hit. I knew it was pointless to think about these things at times like this, but this kind of stuff forced me to realize that if the two of us weren't basically in different universes, she would never have earned the Silver Wings assault badge. Company commander to all hands, in 300 seconds the bombardment will continue. Fall back. And then, at some point while I was spacing out, the scattered vestiges of the enemy forces had begun to retreat. The battle always ended while I was just flying for dear life. Naturally, then I had braced myself for the usual orders to pursue, so it was a bit of a relief to answer, Roger. Yes, relief. Relief that I wouldn't have to guiltily chase down the enemy and slaughter them like dogs. I was different from Lieutenant Degrichov, who could calmly nail fleeing enemy soldiers in the back with optical sniping or explosion formulas. I was relieved because I wouldn't have to shoot. When I was doing everything I can just to fly after her, I practically went into a trance, scattering formulas at random with no time to think. But I still hesitated when I had to aim at a fleeing soldier and cast. I mean, I would wonder if killing them was the right thing to do. Of course, as Corporal Victoria Ivanova Serebrikov, I should shoot, but as Visha, I have no motive. We're all here, no casualties, no losses besides gear. When we landed at the rendezvous point, The sudden release from tension left my gaze. The sole thought occupying my mind was a desire to sleep like a log. I did wonder if that was all right, as a young lady of a delicate age, but on the front, where there was barely any water, you couldn't hope for something as convenient as a girl's shower room. Lieutenant Degrachev brusquely muttered, "Sleeping now, night," and went to bed, so I followed her example and decided to just be thankful I had a bed. I was so ready for rest. But it turned out God wasn't so kind. We were suddenly called to assemble. Before I knew it, we all had gathered. "Good, okay, company. I have some bad news." Uh-oh. I couldn't help but grow tense as Lieutenant Schwarzkopf matter-of-factly, unsympathetically so, continued talking. Even with my limited military experience, I had learned that there was no worse sign than a commanding officer going on matter-of-factly. "We've received an urgent message. The 403rd Assault Mage Company has suddenly entered an encounter battle with two penetrating enemy mage companies." That meant the company that was tasked with handling the next enemy wave had been attacked. A new enemy had bothered the guys who were supposed to be attacking the reinforcements. My brain was tired, but the sense of crisis got it moving, and soon I was up to speed. There were our troops, the next wave of enemy forces, and the new enemy. And the reinforcements? The artillery is pounding away at them, but the observer is being chased by enemy direct support mages and can't properly assess the impacts. The conversation between superior officers made me predict a horribly bad future. I have to fight again. I sighed as I comprehended the situation. So we have to rendezvous with the 403rd. We're moving out immediately. It was just one thing after another. And plus, it's not so easy to rebuild the will to fight once you've relaxed. The company commander continued, heedless of me and my scattered thoughts. At the same time, we have to rescue that observer who's under attack. He's requested backup. That reminds me, you experienced something like this up north, didn't you, Lieutenant Degrachev? Yes, sir, and I'm not about to repeat it. Observing for the artillery was almost like painting a target on your back for enemy mages. Any veteran would repeatedly tell you how critical it was to take out the artillery's eyes, because then the guns were nothing to be afraid of. If you were the eyes for the ruler on the battlefield, your fate was being the first to get shot at. "Elia, you damn liar, you're not safe in the rear having tea." Observers got targeted to a shocking degree. What terrified me more than anything was that even Lieutenant Degrachev, who could calmly weave through a hail of bullets, had been seriously injured when she was an observer. That was how intensely the enemies came after them. Another way to think of it was that this observer, in the same position as Elia, was in serious trouble. It wasn't at all logical, but a voice was telling me that I had to save them. I didn't really understand the feeling either, so I had to do my best in this rescue operation. Newly determined, I stretched and took a deep breath to wake up. But I only felt different. On the outside, I still looked like a dead, tired kid. "I see well. Well then, Lieutenant Degrachev, as a Silver Wings recipient, is the rescue possible? Not even counting any potential delays, it would be difficult. Even if you use the Type 95? "I'm fine, but Corporal Serebriakov looks to be at her limits," Lieutenant Degrachev responded, a bit resigned sounding, after glancing at me as I stood there, dazed and motionless. I don't want to be an inept officer who takes her subordinate out on a rescue mission only to lose her in addition to the one we're supposed to be rescuing. Then break up the pair. No, never mind. The emotions contained in her words were hard to pin down. Maybe disappointment, maybe concern, but in the end, what she'd simply stated was that it was impossible, and the way Lieutenant Schwarzkopf changed his mind mid-sentence said it all. A pair was the basic unit. If Lieutenant Degrachev flew the rescue mission solo, I would be faced with an aerial battle with at least two mage companies. Assuming that units over the border would have backup was elementary. Without my buddy's help, my chances of survival as a squirt with no support were slim. Even if I wanted to go on the mission, I was standing there in front of them all, tired and absent-minded after the last attack. That was why they rejected the idea. That was where their hesitation came from. When I realized that, I shouted. I didn't understand the urge very well myself. Commander, if I may. Corporal Serebryakov. I'd like to volunteer. I volunteer for the rescue mission. Lieutenant Schwarzkopf sounded suspicious. Well, I had interrupted my superior officers, which could get me punished, possibly even court-martialed. I never would have dreamed I'd do something so impulsive, that I had that kind of guts. Corporal. Sir, I'm an Imperial soldier too. While it's presumptuous of me to say so, I believe I can handle this mission. Lieutenant Degrachev's short reprimands would usually make me go limp, but even her harsh tone couldn't stop me this time. Commander, please let me go. That's what she says, Lieutenant. Lieutenant Schwarzkopf? Her shocked yelp and her eyes, usually half closed in disinterest, now popped as wide open as they could go. The way she objected to this unbelievable response made her look somehow closer to the 10-year-old girl she was. Apparently, even someone who seemed so cold on the surface had been worrying about her subordinates. I'll have Sean's squad escort you. Move out. But, Lieutenant, she made up her mind. I understand your concern, Lieutenant, but any more just makes you overprotective. Lieutenant Degrachev looked astonished. Maybe she's more emotional than she lets on. The thought was impertinent, but her expressions were so funny that I couldn't help it, though it wasn't what I should have been focusing on at that moment. I felt I sort of understood my friend, who teased me for my funny faces. Lieutenant Degrachev's vampire-like coldness had faded, and a little bit of distress took its place. It was weird to realize just then how unexpectedly important I was to her. And it was a bit late in the game, but it also struck me what a young girl it was taking care of me. Understood. I'll do my best. To save the day in the crisis is the dream of every mage. Good luck. And to you, Commander. With that, the main body of the company left. Lieutenant Degrachev saw them off and then turned to me with an admiring smile. Well then, Corporal, are you ready? It was a good smile. For some reason, seeing that expression, I couldn't help but think she really did have pointy teeth like a vampire's, but I still smiled back, proud and confident. That's right. I made up my mind. I won't abandon anyone. Yes, Lieutenant. Good. Then it's time to go to work. Sergeant Shones, I'll be making good use of your team as well. Sure thing. We've got more experience on the Rhine front than anyone. Damn intelligence to hell! How could they tell us this area was underdefended? The combatants were nimble, graceful from a distance, but in reality, the Imperial mages were desperately taking evasive actions as the observer cast his optical formula with a shower of mana glow. This was the This was finally shot number 4. They had been picking off enemy observers for a while now, but it hadn't affected the artillery's accuracy one bit. From the sound, they were probably firing 120mm cannons. Worst case scenario, maybe 180mm or 240mm as well. The ground forces trying to leave the fighting area were in disarray, and the enemy was having a field day. Their breaching formation may have been ideal for speed, but it made them vulnerable to counterfire. Their only advantage was direct mage support that let them focus on breaking the line. Unfortunately, Control couldn't get around to assisting them, so they were intercepted about as well as they were shooting at random, as if they were shooting at random with their eyes closed. Though they had taken out the solo enemy observers, a warning must have gone out. There were limits to how well jamming could be maintained. Enough time had elapsed that they had to assume that a decent intercepting force, or quick reaction force, was on its way. In the worst-case scenario, their own retreat would be cut off in addition to the ground troops. That's how much time had gone by. If you got time to slap your lips, cast some formulas, you bastards! To support their infantry's retreat, they had to neutralize the enemy artillery somehow. And that was the problem. How? The simplest way would be to attack them, but from the scale of bombardment, it seemed like corpse-level artillery. If it were artillery attached to a division or a battalion, charging in prepared to die would give them a chance, but corpse-level artillery would anticipate anti-mage combat. That's why their only option is to hunt down the weak points, the observers. But not only did that take a lot of time and effort, the effects weren't immediately obvious. Aye, sir. There's only so much we can do with the opticals. Give us authorization for explosion formulas. If they blew up the whole area with explosion formulas, that would catch any observer hiding on the ground too. They didn't have time to scan the surface for each optical cast. Not only did they have to drop their altitude to a certain extent, but also they had to do multiple flyovers to ensure they didn't miss anything. At first they caught them off guard, but their enemies weren't stupid. The ones who expected their opponents to be fools are the real idiots. News of their attack must have spread quickly, so the other observer had probably gone into hiding. Finding them would only take a terrific amount of effort. A terrific amount of effort, eh? At this rate, we won't even be able to get half of them. Hence the idea of blowing the entire suspicious zone away. That was one valid method. Actually, in the preliminary stages of artillery battles, both sides would send out scouting parties to search for the enemy's position and lay down high-explosive anti-personnel suppressive fire. If they were lucky, they might take out the observer squad, but this method presupposed a certain amount of firepower. Basically, they would need at least an entire mage company sustaining maximum available firepower to carpet bomb the area. That would certainly give them a boost, but it would be too heavy a burden for the current forward direct support unit. And if they suppressed them with a formula big enough to burn up the whole area, it would seriously hamper them in sustaining combat later. Out of the question. In the long term, it will just make finding them harder. But in the long term, it was really not their day. Detecting high mana, suspected reinforcements, mages coming up fast. God damn it! Forget hunting observers, get ready to intercept. They were scattered and exhausted. Military doctrine would emphatically recommend avoiding combat in such a state, but logic was first and foremost idealistic. Things wouldn't be so tough if it were actually possible to follow that doctrine in combat. Since the leading army had yet to finish extricating itself, if the backup was to retreat, literally everyone on the ground would get killed. Of course, the ground units had been retreating since the moment they failed to break through, and an overhead view of the battlefield showed the entire army was pulling out, but mages could move far faster than troops on the surface. They could just see the observers returning to direct the batteries and take out their ground army while they were fighting off the reinforcement mages. That was why they had to secure the airspace. There was some battles you just couldn't run away from. All units, our observer is down. I say again, our observer is down. Hearing that, Second Lieutenant Tanya Digorichov made an irritated face and mutters, "Just great, just fucking great. If only we had sortied slightly earlier, or even a bit later," is the lament that crosses her mind. All I can do is curse the terrible timing. They didn't make it in time to help their ally, but have come too close to the enemy to turn back now. This will be all pain and no gain. As you all just heard, unfortunately we didn't make it in time, but that just means our job is a bit different. Lieutenant Degrichov, isn't this too much for one platoon? Sergeant Shones, on loan to Tanya from the company commander, gives a warning. According to the latest from Combat Direction Center, they've lost contact with a mage. They're sure he was shot down before his signal went dead. He reported a group of enemy mages that looked like at least 2 companies. In a sense, retreating is the correct answer despite the danger of being pursued. They were dispatched to perform a rescue. If the object of the mission had been taken out, there was no need for them to stick around. Sergeant Shones, your opinion is correct in most cases, but not in our current situation. Common sense would never have them undertaking this flight as a solo platoon. Even Tanya would turn on her heel and return to base if there was enough distance between them. But rather than risk pursuit and be constantly watching their backs, it's better to take the initiative and strike. I can't deny that we're outnumbered, but we don't need to wait around for the enemy to regroup and assemble. Taking our enemies one by one is an elementary war strategy. From the way they're moving, the penetrators are probably 2 companies equipped for long-range movement. They're probably elite forces, but they've come a long way on high alert. Surely they're more than a little tired. They had to break through the Empire's defensive line and save energy for the equally long trek back to base. That greatly limits the amount of energy they can expend in the firefight. Meanwhile, the Imperial mages can put up a fierce defense and then just wait for friendly forces to pick them up afterward. If the artillery makes it to their position in time, a cleanup bombardment could be arranged. Of course, even if the enemy is exhausted, I can't count on them to be careless. Still, the body often betrays the will. My platoon's chances of victory are not slim. More than anything, the enemy is scattered due to the sweeping operation. Their units are too spread out and can only coordinate in groups up to platoon size. Although this battle is following directly on the previous one, the mages from the Imperial Army can go full throttle since they're in defense. Meanwhile, the Republican side has to operate on enemy territory with limited support and supplies. Assuming even numbers, the scale will still tip heavily towards the Empire. In other words, this is simply a task of a simple task of taking out one exhausted platoon 6 times. Maybe it's a slapdog strategy, but they have the supplies. They even have support, though not much. 1 on 6 sounds hopeless, but 1 on 1 gives them a chance. If they do some damage despite their numerical inferiority, the army can't ask for anything more. Okay, boys, I'll take 3 platoons, the rest are yours. This shouldn't be too hard. I can't expect to wipe them out completely, but it's a perfect opportunity to rack up points by taking them out one at a time. It's a good chance to put my capabilities on display. The rescue was a failure, but thankfully we've got the artillery battery behind us, and little energy to spare. I hear they even saved some shrapnel shells for us. How perfect! I have been upset that I didn't get away with using my exhausted partner to refuse the mission, but I guess you still know when you'll get your... I guess you never know when you'll get lucky in life. Still, Tanya thinks, with a glance at the face of the subordinate behind her, Corporal Serebrikov may be nervous, but she's flying steady. She's skilled, yet she was drafted. She didn't join up because she wanted to. She's a young girl who was pressed into service. I would never have dreamed a corporal with such a background would volunteer for combat. Was it out of a sense of duty, patriotism, love for her buddy? Someone willing to do jobs above their pay grade is a promising human resource. Are you trying to monopolize the title of ace, Lieutenant? Good question, Sergeant. Nah, just if I take out 10 more, I'll get a bonus and time off. I'm about ready for a vacation, she joked glibly. If my score breaks 50, I'll earn a special break, specifically 2 weeks off plus a bonus and a raise on top of that. I would be given flex time and authorization for limited discretionary action. 5 down makes me an ace, 50 down makes me an ace of aces. Unfortunately, testing the Type 95 muddied my memory, and I'm sniping from artillery bombardment range. That means that inevitably, many of my scores have been unconfirmed. Still, at least some had been acknowledged, so I'm currently at 40. The best thing is that with these clean results, I won't be put on trial for war crimes. Even after the war, it won't be a problem. How about that? In other words, killing one person is a crime, but killing a pile of them gets you a medal. Most people would find that inconsistent, but economic theory makes it acceptable. Once I get it, I'm going to take it easy and splurge on gourmet food. Sorry guys, I want to go have a leisurely beer hall lunch. I can't even tell you how jealous I am, Sergeant Schoen's jokes with a nod. Corporal Serebrikov and the other team members smile, somewhat at a loss. That's how it's meant to be, though. After working to accomplish something, she should be allowed to enjoy the fruits of her labor. Winners on vacation even get to eat tasty food in the rear. There are opportunities to dine with corporate managers. In short, she would be in the best environment to build social capital. Simply just wonderful. I feel bad since you're accompanying us as a favor, Sergeant Schoens, but well, first come, first served. Schwarzkopf, concerned for their lack of manpower, dug into his hurting personal pocket and lent them this squad. Maybe it's only 2 people, but in mages, that's more than a little muscle. It also meant that the Empire still had the resources to make a considerate gesture. In other words, I still have time to fall back to the rear. If I don't take my chance to go back now and get stuck here until I'm worn down, all that would be left of me is happy times in a psychiatric ward. I definitely don't want that, so I have to make winning the war my objective and be ready for anything. Can we win? True, the Empire is a war machine of unparalleled precision, just like the Germany I once knew. If they fight against a single country, they're sure to win. Fight on 2 fronts, it's simply not possible. But though those facts speak to their military strength, they don't guarantee victory. After all, this is one nation against the world. It's less like a world war than me versus the rest of the world. Can such a war be won? Honestly, it'll be difficult. War is only fun when you're winning, Tanya says. Oh, and here I thought you would enjoy the despair of the defensive line. I could consider it if it would advance my career. But frankly speaking, I can't rapid-fire miracles. The Type 95 is the crystallization of a curse. Even if I use this thing, and I don't really want to, it doesn't mean I'll win for sure. There are no guarantees. I'm a soldier, I go where I'm ordered. Company staff fulfills directives similarly. If military officers don't swear loyalty to their country, at least as a formality, they're in violation of their contract. Tanya was forced to fight this war. Who would take such a gamble with their own free will? Her answer is short and to the point. Sorry to butt in, Lieutenant, but you don't like the war either? But perhaps unexpected, because Corporal Subrayakov takes the rare step of joining their conversation, looking puzzled. Of course, Corporal. Even I prefer a quiet life. What about you, Sergeant Schoens? I'm with you, Lieutenant. Maybe it's part of his plan, but Schoens jokingly gives a smart-looking salute. Mainly he does it to ease the other pair's bizarrely tense mood. Nicely accomplished, no wonder they say an outstanding NCO is invaluable. NCO is a rank, by the way. Non-commissioned officer, I believe. Anyway, continuing. Well, that goes without saying. All right, time to plan the welcome party. After wrapping up their conversation, Tanya rapidly ascends to combat altitude. Her wish for tranquility and her hatred for the ones who disrupted it are making a storm in her heart. Who actually wants to carry a rifle and fight? Her fury is intense. Let this cursed world go to ruin. Well, let everything except me go to ruin. If that's not possible, may I at least avoid ruin, she mutters in her head as she races across the sky. What's your plan, Lieutenant? Let's give them a grand reception. We'll treat them to lead and manna glow. Lead is a government expense, and wasting the budget will lower her evaluation. But investing resources via sales efforts is part of business. The cost of entertaining clients can be expensed because they are a necessity. So if something is a necessity, they can use as much as they want as long as they get results. If mages can mass produce enemy corpses, no one would complain about how many bullets they use. That's a beautiful line. If mages can mass produce enemy corpses, no one would complain about how many bullets they use. I do worry about the stomachs of the finance officers. I feel genuinely bad when thinking of their stress. I really do. So I hope the people in charge of mental health will help them out. My job is to spend money to defeat the enemy. The finance officer's job is to come up with the money. And our mental care is the task of professional support personnel. In an ideal world, everyone contributes in their own way. We should praise order and applaud economics for foreseeing this evolution of the division of labor. Should we check out if they have passports and visas? Yes, let's. That's right. The laws of war shouldn't invalidate border control laws. If someone crossed the line the Empire has determined to be its border, it goes without saying that the newcomer will have to go through immigration. How careless of me. needing a reminder from my subordinates. Okay, that's our signal to begin. How about we make it a contest? Then let's say whoever downs the most enemies wins. If you can beat me, I'll steal the commander's secret wine stash. I remember when I peeked into his tent one time. I saw wine so fine it looked totally out of place. He must have won it in a card game, but it shouldn't be too hard to convince him to give it to someone for a job well done. If he refuses, I'll just abandon civil tactics. Sure, I may not be old enough to drink, but I still know a good bottle when I see one. Well then, all right. If Lieutenant Degrichoff snags the win on her own, we'll all give you our allowances for today. Not bad at all. You're on. The Rhine front. My head felt heavy, and my consciousness was hazy. My unit, my subordinates, I no longer had the wherewithal to worry about them. It was all I could do to stay conscious through to the next second, though I'd quickly spotted a refracting optical decoy. I was still performing more evasive maneuvers than was deemed safe. Though I just barely managed to maintain control, the company, proud to be one of the Republic's finest, was at the mercy of a single enemy. Everything had happened so fast. Mayday, mayday, mayday. First was the distress call notifying us of the enemy contact. I'd never heard the forward controller scream like that. Break, break! The commander instructed us to scatter. Nothing could be stupider than all getting shot at once from a distance. Even though we obeyed immediately and had trained to pull it off, it wasn't enough. I cocked my head, unable to spot the enemy, and my buddy got his upper body blown off. Sean! Bandit! Angel 12! Angel 12! Angel 12? I scanned the sky for the source of the attack, and when I found the bastard, I was speechless. 12,000 feet, an altitude that made the practical limit of 6,000 for mages look like nothing. Not only was it a harsh environment where oxygen concentration was roughly 60% of ground level, but the biggest problem was that you would run out of mana. The aerial mage limit for practical maneuvering was 6,000 for good reason. Impossible! It's not a fighter plane? Fucking hell, it's definitely a mage. We wondered if it was maybe a plane, but no, there was no doubt about it. We detected mana particles and glow. It was definitely an aerial mage. The air up there was thin, very thin. The temperature was low. Running out of mana was fatal. Acclimating to that altitude was also a hurdle. While it was hard to believe, the enemy mage had overcome all those things and was managing to fight a war. I couldn't stop thinking that the leisurely, soaring figure was an incarnation of imperial military might. Climb! We're climbing! We'll engage at 8,000 feet. My unit was completely exhausted. Eliminating an enemy observer squad had worn down their concentration, and they were also worn down from being in the air for so long. It took forces of equal numbers and strength. If two forces of equal number and strength fight, the odds are in favor of the side that is better rested. That's simple logic. The Empire's aerial mages were known for being elite, whereas outside had a tendency to make up for inferior quality with quantity. Whereas outsiders and foreign nations had a tendency to make up for inferior quality of mages with quantity. And this enemy was something else. Even if we were to attack at peak performance, we'd probably still be in for a tough fight. For starters, approaching an enemy at 12,000 feet was impossible. Captain, there's no other way. In theory, aerial mages had a slight edge over aircraft, but that was at altitudes below 6,000 feet. Aerial mages were able to use magic, but they were still just flesh and blood humans. In combat at high altitudes, they were nothing but targets. No wonder the AWACS guy is going crazy. AWACS is an acronym. I don't know what it stands for. Anyway, continuing. Right, that he's insane. I see. The enemy mage is far from normal. I could understand why the Airborne Early Warning and Control System, AWACS, that's what it stands for, was going nuts. I mean, according to the standard aerial mage rules of engagement, it wasn't possible to ascend beyond 6,800 feet. No, it actually is impossible. 6,000 feet was the limit for a proper fight to the death with computation orbs and rifles. I'd heard that in rare cases of aerial mages from Highland regiments fighting above 7,000 was possible, but this was on another level. That was 12,000 feet in the air. At that altitude, even fighter pilots would need oxygen or they'd black out. The air was simply too thin. The only reason you would ever climb that high was an extreme emergency evasive action. Even if we managed to shoot down the enemy mage, getting back would be hopeless. But this time, we had to go. If we can't suppress that Imperial, our ground forces won't be able to get home. You're right. We have to do this. It was true for more than just aerial mage battles. Letting the enemy get you from above was fatal. So all we could do was climb. If we couldn't at least get him in range, we could be stuck as prey. Whether we would eventually run or fight, we first had to climb. There was no other choice. Running was not an option. We had to buy enough time for the ground forces to retreat. Otherwise, it was possible we would all be wiped out. We were left with no choice from the start. This is all-out war. Don't even worry about getting home. I would fight until my mana was depleted. Most importantly, I had to avenge Sean. I couldn't let this enemy get home alive. Crush that mage! Don't stop until that bastard crushes you! Was it an order or a scream? Either way, our commander was determined. We would either take out the enemy or we would be taken out. There was only two choices. Bravo, engage! The Bravo team joined the fight. We would probably all be destroyed, and I wanted to curse God in spite of myself. I felt like a real sorry wretch thinking this pain in the ass could have backup. Oh my God. But my long-distance observation formula showed me something even worse. I searched for our target's mana signature in the library. The hit I got was far more horrible than reinforcements. Registered mages, also known as named. The aerial mage world was small. A company was only 12 members. Even a battalion was only 36. That was the kind of world this was. If you shot down 5 enemy mages, you were called an ace. And when your score hit 50, you'd be recognized as an ace of aces. Units with 6 or more aces and individuals with over 30 kills crossed a threshold. Crossing that threshold meant being registered by foreign armies and perceived as a formidable adversary. Named dominated the battlefield. The only viable way to counter one were to employ overwhelming resources or an equally strong or stronger named mage, to enter into a dogfight and win. To the men on the battlefield, nothing was more reassuring than having friendly named mages in the sky. For those reasons, enemy named were given individual names and caution was urged. To the Republic, registered mage, name Devil of the Rhine, meant sheer calamity. To the Republic, registered mage name Devil of the Rhine meant sheer calamity. A registered enemy aerial mage had been recognized as a strategic threat. Among them, the Devil of the Rhine was one everyone was most eager to avoid. It had been a mere 2 months since he had been spotted on the front, yet he had already acclimated over 60 points. Especially horrifying were his skills with heavy mana, spatial deterioration, and precision optical sniping formulas. Units would lose half of their soldiers just from falling for the fishbait strategy snipers commonly use. The nastiest thing was that many of the mages had suffered wounds that nearly kept them from returning to base at all. We didn't want to lose such precious resources, so aerial mages received intensive care, but almost all of them died. Not only did that consume vast amounts of medicine, but it also tied up the medics, which led to a shortage of care for ground force soldiers, and thus subsequently harmed morale. On top of that, losing so many mages was becoming an issue from the tactical point of view. A single actor was taking out an entire military and their strategy. What could you call him besides the devil? He had to be taken out by any means necessary. Naturally, it would be reckless to engage at 12,000 feet, but at 8,000 we had a shot. We may not have been at 100%, but we did have the numerical advantage. Plus, the guy was flying at 12,000 feet. No matter how extraordinary you were, that was impossible to do without pushing yourself too hard. Degrachav definitely didn't expect the enemy unit to come charging at her. They had looked so exhausted and scattered, she couldn't imagine them having any energy left, so she thought she would pop them one by one from a distance. But apparently, she counted her chickens before they hatched. Charging under these circumstances was utterly reckless, but it was also terribly effective. Devil of the Rhine, today we take you down. I don't believe we've met. Tanya is bewildered, but for some reason the enemy's will to fight is centered on her. Genuinely puzzled, I proceed with my tactical considerations. My opponent's maneuvers are nimble and unpredictable. Precision sniping will no longer be effective. It would be best to switch to either explosion type magics capable of targeting an entire area, or spatial targeted guidance formulas. Target locked, adjusting for relative velocity. She unconsciously chooses the optimal attack using the Elenium Type 95. Rebuild neural linkage network. Ion concentrations normal. Metamotor cortex parameters updated. All systems green. Nicht. Multiple faint early targeting mana signals detected. Formula types include invisible guided shots and spatially casting blasts. The enemy is close enough to engage, but I was distracted by pointless chatter and didn't realize. Signal alarms scream in her head. I immediately start up casting process in parallel using the Elenium Type 95 cores. Even though I know it will cause a system imbalance, I pour energy in as fast as I can. Meanwhile, she begins erratic evasive maneuvers automatically. Just as she gets out of the way, her previous position erupts with mana glow. Some of the formulas seem to have been explosion type, and the shockwaves create wild turbulence. Okay, what's all this now? I think maybe it's a Highland unit, but can they climb straight to 8,000 feet without acclimating? Despite the vertical distance between them, they have me in range. Worse, I'm outnumbered. If they're going to charge, then it seems the enemy is tougher than I thought. Convinced of my opponent's skills to some extent, I immediately create an optical decoy. While casting that, I initiate evasive maneuvers in order to prevent them from predicting my flight path. But even after a number of illusions, a magical shot comes flying at my actual body. How is their discipline fire so accurate and so fast? That shot missed? What a monster! These guys are obnoxious, shouting like that on the open channel. Wait, they must be doing it on purpose. They're capitalizing on their numerical advantage. They want to distract me with radio chatter, but I won't fall for it again. Shooting magic in volleys in a combat style that shooting magic in volleys is a combat style Imperial mages avoid, since they rely more on individual skill. The Empire boasts superior quality, but the Republic has always made the most of their numerical superiority. For example, the perfectly ordered formation before her eyes. These have to be some of the named we were always warned about. I checked the mana signatures against the library. My irritating guess was right on the mark. These guys are such a pain that the combat instructors warned everyone about their fire discipline. I am clearly going above and beyond my pay grade. CP, this is urgent. The enemy company is named. I say again, the enemy company is named. CP Roger, I've got reinforcements headed your way. Don't work too hard. Well, that's good news. I should probably be happy they didn't tell me to go die. In military creature society, courage and loud voice are the things that get you praise. When you're in an insane group that respects the foolhardy over the cautious, it's rough to be the sane one. But this is all for my advancement. I have no choice. Reinforcements acknowledged, but this is my battlefield. I don't want to, but I have to at least rush them. Otherwise, it would adversely affect the evaluation of my achievements in this battle. Now that I recall, I wonder how the Kwantung, I think they mean Kuomintang, but the Kwantung army was able to puff up their self-image so much. That said, I can definitely get ahead of it if I act like them. Nobody who calls themselves a patriot is worth a damn. True patriots demonstrate their love for their country through actions, but the fakes express it in words. To get ahead, you have to do both. Patriotism is really a really handy tool, and tools are meant to be used. Our mission is to eliminate the rabble violating the Empire's borders, regardless of whether they're from the Entente Alliance or the Republic. We don't discriminate. The Elenium Type 95 comes with a curse that corrodes my mind the more I use it. In exchange for performance, I have to exalt the self-proclaimed god, being X, with all my might. The only silver lining is that since I'm employing the Kwantung Army promotion doctrine, I can at least make it sound like patriotism. I have no idea what that doctrine they're referencing is, something to do with Japanese history or possibly Vietnam, I'm not sure. Continuing. But there's really something wrong with the army if the more you copy those big-talking Sujin guys, I'm butchering that word, Sujin, Tsugene guys, the more you advance. That has got to be why there are soldiers who actually want to take part in something as stupid as war. Really, no one should long for peace and an idle life more than soldiers. Spatial coordinates acquired, potential evasion paths calculated, expanding chamber magic filling normally. Expansion chamber magic filling normally. They want to leverage their numerical superiority and hunt me down. I doubt taking out one at a time will work against Republican mages. If I try, they'll probably gang up on me. They take pride in their perfect coordination, after all. I was unbelievably lucky to have the chance to pick them off and thin the herd at first. I can't expect an opportunity like that again, so I need to switch up my tactics. In short, I just need to treat this clump of guys as a single target instead. Time for some giant killing. I don't need to fiddle around with my aim. I can just target the whole area. CP requesting theater warning for spatial detonation. CP Roger will issue a spatial detonation warning. Elenium Type 95 is capable of storing mana via its system of 4 synchronized cores. With an explosion formula cast at full throttle operations with that stock of magic, it's possible to superpose interference across the entire war zone. Of course, that means full throttle operations of a flawed orb. Something stupid is bound to happen. Sergeant, Shons, prepare for impact. In addition to blowing up friend and foe indiscriminately, it would litter the area with mana noise and reduce visibility with smoke, isolating soldiers. It would throw organized combat into chaos, making all coordination impossible. So I can't just go using it willy-nilly when fighting on a team. The tactic is so disruptive, in fact, that the instructor unit was kind enough to comment that apart from self-destruction, there was no use for it. If, however, the fight is one versus a group, it can blow away the group's organization and turn the fight into one versus multiple individuals. Thus, the verdict is the formula causes nothing but problems in battles, but it's not bad to have on hand when low on manpower. Begone, impotent foes. This is our empire, Ah, sky. Ah, home. I should be able to get positive evaluations for proclaiming my nationalism into the entire area on an open broadcast channel. Coincidentally, the military also generally approves of religious faith, so I might as well make use of being X's curse to get ahead. I'll just have to accept it this time, even if I scream in agony as my freedom and dignity are trampled. If ye come to disrespect the fatherland, we shall pray unto God. The enemy mages began spreading out. They created a zone of interlocking fire from either side. Rather than concentrate their shots on Tanya, they planned to torture her to death in midair. On top of that, as a precaution against ordinary explosion formulas, the spread is wider than usual. O Lord, save the fatherland. O Lord, grant me the strength to defeat my nation's enemies. They can pin me down even after all those intense maneuvers up this high? These guys are war crazy. Geez, if you like it so much, you should just split into two sides and kill each other and leave us the hell out of it. Why do they have to get other people involved? Did no one teach them not to be a bother? There had to have been some major flaws in their education. Education decides a child's future. They need to take it seriously. Or maybe they're rational, economical people like me, using war to advance their careers and aiming to survive. Wait a minute. If that's the case, shouldn't I do my best to negotiate for a profitable outcome? How could a logical, economically minded person like me nearly forget the pursuit of profit? Is war so harsh that people lose all reason? Profit is everything. That's self-evident. In short, negotiation is key. If you blow up the other party before you start the dialogue, there won't be any of that. There will be no profit to be had. By the time this dawns on Tanya, she's overwhelmed by how easily her reasoning had been impaired by the war, and by how far she'd gone down the path to losing her humanity. Unless your hobby is fighting to the death, killing someone without getting anything out of it is pointless. Right, this isn't a zero-sum game, so building cooperative relationships should be theoretically possible. Then, instead of earnestly slaughtering one another, it would be more logical to rig the game. We'll move from a savage world of killing and being killed into a world of reason. Surely the fabled win-win solution is possible. We can't go overboard. Just as economists were able to determine through statistics that Japan's national sport was riddled with fixed matches, our deception will one day be exposed, but by the time a third party sees through our plot, the fighting will be long over. Economists have plenty of other things to be working on during a war, and most of the time those things are extremely important. Save us from the heathen invasion. O God, grant me the strength to slay our enemies. I have to just keep singing meaningless praise to make it look like I'm using a formula. That way I can conceal my intentions from CP for a while. If this goes well, all I have to do is settle the negotiations while they can't tell what I'm doing due to the mana noise. Things are coming together. Not noting that, Tanya thinks for a moment, and then decides that the proper time for her message might be at hand. Perhaps they will open the door to negotiation, and things will go well for both sides. No one can call themselves an adult if they are bound by preconceptions. Maybe she's only been looking at Republican soldiers as stereotypes. People are more than their appearances. Surely we need to gain a thorough understanding of people's true inner selves to interact with them properly. All individual personalities are one of a kind and thus deserving of respect. Even in the middle of a war, if it might be possible to negotiate with someone, you should be sincere with them. Of course, negotiating with the enemy will naturally get you court-martialed. Forsaking combat is treated the same as fleeing before the enemy. You have no way to talk yourself out of the death by firing squad that awaits. However, if I can avoid needless combat as an upright individual, I'll accept the personal risk. If I can make myself understood, I'm willing to forego opportunities for promotion and time off. I'll earn them by defending myself from war-crazed maniacs. Most importantly, the amount of risk and labor involved here is clearly unfair given my salary. I have no obligation to do work above my pay grade. In the unfortunate event that I can't make myself understood, I'll have to take them down and have a nice vacation eating tasty food in the rear. It's a crying shame I can't drink wine. But the region back there is famous for the way it prepares sautéed fish. I'm sure it'll be exquisite. Attention, you are trespassing on the Empire's territory. For now, let's start with a couple benign remarks. We will do our utmost to defend our fatherland, because behind us are people we must protect. Apparently, a soldier's duty is to protect their country's people. Though some armies are violence machines and some belong to emperors, soldiers really are usually protectors of their nation. Well, there are also cases like Prussia, where the army possesses the state instead of the state possessing the army, so it's not a hard rule. But the generalization sure sounds good. Answer me this. Why do you wish to invade the Empire, our homeland? She says it like a reprimand, but she actually wants an answer. I'll get the negotiation ball rolling. I may be talking to the enemy, but this is still innocuous enough that I can explain it away. I wonder what their response will be, but all I get is a barrage of curses and a hail of bullets. Are these guys really just a bunch of dumb, war-crazed animals? I can't help but doubt their sanity. So these people aren't modern entrepreneurs I can calmly pursue a rational outcome with. Or perhaps they, too, have lost their humanity in the war. If that's the case, how sad. That means I have to play along with these war-loving fools. The worst possible scenario. She wants to request overtime pay along with extra compensation for being placed in this hazardous working environment, but she doesn't know who to invoice. I realize it's immature to throw a fit, but I want to cry. This is CP with a warning for the theater. Watch out for mana noise. CP is kind enough to issue the warning Tanya requested, and she has accumulated enough mana. Alright, if these guys are logical, economically minded fellows, they're sure to value 1 over 0. Who knows? Maybe they're the prudent types who wouldn't take a risk while the radio signal is good. Even if they get bombed first, rational fellows like that will undoubtedly choose a reasonable solution if they survive. At least I would choose a reasonable solution. Maybe I would get this over with, knock it off with the hesitation and delays, and get things moving. Focus on controlling all the mana I saved up and accepting the noise in my thoughts. O saints, believe in the blessings of our Lord. Let us be fearless. Tanya feels drained at the sudden release of loaded mana. She wants to scream as all the energy is sucked out of every one of her cells. But the Elenium Type 95's curse prevents it. Still, she can't get over how weird it is for pain to be forcefully converted into religious ecstasy. The sensation of joy and agony blends to rattle your mind. The sensation of joy and agony blending to rattle your mind is a horror beyond description. Lament not your fate. Oh, the Lord has not forsaken us. The full-body pleasure and the uncomfortable deprivation of my freedom finally reaches an intolerable level. If she could, she would curse him, but her mouth is probably only capable of praise. It annoys me, but the one thing the commies got right was to call religion a drug. The Chicago School of Economics says drugs should be regulated by the economy. That said, my problem isn't that I want to stop, but can't. It's that if I stop, I'm likely to die. It's the biggest pain in the ass. The Chicago School doesn't consider the case of a drug, where if you quit, you instantly die. At the distant end of our journey, let us reach the promised land. A process similar to a thermobaric explosion starts up instantaneously. The mana has reached its pressurization limit and gushes out at an immeasurable rate. As the boiling magic explodes into freedom, the scattering mana makes contact with the open air and triggers an unconfined magical explosion. The abrupt changes in atmospheric pressure could collapse lungs and cause pulmonary congestion, and the combustion drops the already low oxygen concentrations to fatal levels. Oxygen deprivation and carbon monoxide poisoning at 8,000 feet would cause even the hardiest aerial mage to black out and fall. Anyone who manages to maintain consciousness would experience agonizing pain, collapsed lungs, carbon monoxide poisoning, and the complications from the steep drop in oxygen hurt like hell. Even Degrichov, who out of range has trouble breathing as the oxygen concentration falls. If the mages in range are still able to fly, that won't last long. The free-range magical explosion creates mana noise over a wide area. Not only does it cut off communications, but also it makes sustaining flight formulas difficult, so continuing the battle is impossible. Although smoke limits her visibility, it's easy to imagine the state of her opponents who have received a direct hit. Attention fighters of the Republican Army. This battle is over. So Tanya attempts to suggest they surrender. She has to wonder if after all that there are even any survivors left, but it doesn't cost her anything to try. Well, if there are no survivors, I can take my accomplishment of annihilating an entire company and enjoy a tea break in the rear. If we surrender, we'll guarantee your rights as prisoners according to the Worms Convention. So that's a fictionalized version of the Geneva Convention and the Treaty of, there was some other war regulations, international law treaty thing signed at some point. I forget what it was called. I think it involved the League of Nations, but I digress. The Republican Army, which had a strong tendency to rely on numerical superiority, had extraordinary faith in their named. They could put up a fight against the imperial elites, after all. Due to their rarity and strategic value, they were deployed in the most critical of battles, and their bravery was known far and wide. The 106th and 107th Reconnaissance Mage Companies of the 42nd Magic Brigade belonged to the 4th Aerial Mage Divisions, were also famous for their skills, until recently, at least. The Tactical Council regarding the recent annihilation of the 106th and 107th Reconnaissance Mage Companies is now in session. Initially, the Republic had assumed that the Imperial Army's powerful mage units, including the named mage, the Devil of the Rhine, were deployed on the front lines against the Entente Alliance, so it should have been impossible for its named and equally elite troops to be wiped out. And yet, that was exactly what happened. It happened despite their overwhelming numerical advantage, and at the hands of a single mage. When the news came in, no one could believe their ears. They thought it had to be some kind of mistake. While the 106th and the 107th Companies were engaged suppressing enemy observers, an enemy mage unit came to intercept them. They had sent named units out of necessity due to the long-range nature of the invasion. The mission was too difficult and strenuous to give to anyone else. As hard to believe as the news was, if a numerically inferior unit had inflicted massive damage to them, it was possible it could have repercussions for the entire war. It was no wonder the ranking members of the General Staff, who understood that fact, looked grim. What I'm handing out now is a report combining the logs from recovered computation orbs and survivor accounts. The expressions of the magical officers who had done the analysis were even darker. To prepare the data, they had had to review the computation orb logs and records. The debriefing of the survivors was limited since some of them were severely injured, but what they had heard was shocking. If the information hadn't come straight from half-dead survivors, it would have been hard to believe. No, they wouldn't have wanted to believe it. Anyhow, please take a look at this recording of the battle. Mayday, mayday, mayday! That was the emergency distress signal used when encountering an unexpected enemy. The frontline combat controller, whose job was to remain calm and clear-headed at all times, was shrieking. It might have been funny if it had been a newbie, but he was a veteran. He had been the first to report the 106th defeat and the one to request assistance for retreat. Thanks to him, the survivors of the 106th and 107th Companies could be recovered. Break! Break! The screen, though, awash in static, showed the unit promptly following their commander's order. The aerial mage officers who had done the analysis still found it difficult to accept the reality of what followed. At that moment, according to the log, the user was sniped from a distance far greater than was thought possible. It was hard to believe. The 106th was performing erratic evasive maneuvers. Sean! The screen kept jerking around due to sharp changes in flight path. During that short time, several soldiers were shot out of the sky. Bandit! Angels 12! Angels 12! And then, incredibly, an attack from 12,000 feet. They had already received this information as an emergency report. The issue was an Imperial mage had climbed to double the current standard altitude. If it was true, all of their aerial mages would be rendered virtually powerless. Of all the... It can't be. No one was sure who had spoken, but the sentiment was universal. The number 12,000 momentarily paralyzed their brains. It was too extraordinary. In fact, the unit had wondered if their opponent was a fighter plane, but it was undoubtedly a mage. And performing a series of optical processing techniques on the video, they had managed to make out the standard issue Imperial Army rifle and signs of an unknown computation orb. The distance kept them from getting a clear view of the enemy soldier's features, but they could make out an incredibly small silhouette. Still, the way that mage cruised so calmly, like the ruler of the sky, told them no one could interfere. Then it was confirmed that the 106 opponents was a registered mage. Even worse, this was a new named mage who had recently appeared in the theater and rapidly racked up achievements. All details were unknown. They didn't even know what sorts of tactics this unfathomable threat would use, much less how to counter them. They had kicked intelligence's butt to get a reinvestigation underway, and so far they had found several unconfirmed reports that had been previously dismissed as frontline rumors. Things like a lone enemy soldier taking down an entire company, a mage flying at an impossible altitude, and so on. It was a war zone after all. They understood some of the intelligence coming in was confused, but it was too bad the unusual nature of their opponent was delaying their identification attempts. Damn devil of the Rhine! Cut it out, Captain Kagir. Who is the devil of the Rhine? An unknown enemy named. We can currently identify them only by their magic signature. The intelligence officer had paled at the sudden question. If they were only able to identify this enemy by magic signature alone, that meant they knew nothing. This was as good as admitting to the other high-ranking officers present that everyone in the intelligence branch was incompetent. They could get the gist of what had happened by analyzing the logs of the computation orb used in the battle. In other words, either the intelligence officers had neglected their duties entirely, or nothing had been recorded. Did you analyze the logs? The chief of staff, who was running the meeting, asked the obvious question. Essentially, are you bastards so inept that you couldn't even do that much? We've inspected 17, mainly from recovered orbs of mages who were shot down, and the survivors have all been debriefed. The response from intelligence, however, made it clear that they had done a proper job. They were the ones who sent the notice that an unconfirmed mage had inflicted heavy damage. They formed a special task force and even launched an operation to retrieve the bodies of fallen mages who hadn't been recovered. As a result of that effort, they were able to recover a number of computation orbs and investigate the wreckage to see if there was any salvageable data. But they didn't find anything useful. They had a mountain of evidence indicating the mysterious mage's existence, but they had no idea what he was like. So, only a magic signature? What does that mean? Almost no one survived an encounter close enough to see him. The majority of people who lived were shot down while they were still outside a firing range. Every mage that approached the devil was hit with enough force to leave them with full-body burns. When the computation orbs were retrieved afterward, the tough outer shells often had melted, and their cores were damaged. To inflict that level of damage with conventional weapons, you'd have to pull out either the big guns or a metric ton of explosives. There was a mage out there who could both eliminate opponents at close quarters with overwhelming firepower and strike precisely at great distances. This named had been classified as a strategic level threat, and though they didn't know the mage's identity, they had registered the Devil of the Rhine in their library by magical signature alone. The Devil, alias, was given out of the hatred and fear of an opponent they couldn't see, and it had only been 2 months since the first sighting in this theater. Yes, if the records were correct, the Devil had been deployed just as the Republican Army had attacked, and had already scored more than 60 kills. Troops on the front line had even sent an earnest request for a named experimentation squad composed of their own elites. Moving on, this is footage recorded from a computation orb moments before it failed. Miraculously, the member of the 106th it belongs to survived. The video showed an enemy figure casually evading the volley fire of an entire company. The shots seemed so unlikely to connect that everyone wondered what the soldiers were aiming at. Incredibly, despite the crossfire, the enemy was flying so calmly it looked almost graceful. Is that dancing? The movements were so mesmerizing that someone murmured unknowingly. A spectacular amount of magic glow filled the air, but the enemy dodged its many sources with elegant ease. Irritatingly, not a single shot appeared to hit. They didn't know who had come up with the alias, but Devil of the Rhine was very fitting. No ordinary person could weave through a setup like that and fight back without seeming to be in any danger at all. Is that mage too quick for our disciplined fire to land any shots? Could their mobility really be that much better than ours? The Republican Army had developed their fire discipline in response to the known superiority of Imperial mages. Working as a team, its troops could shoot down the overconfident enemy mages who tended to strike out. Although it was doctrine premised on numerical superiority, the Republican Army considered it a solution. It figured there wasn't a mage alive in the world who could stay in the air once the barrage began. At least, until now. The Devil evaded spatial detonations, too, most likely after detecting the attack during early targeting and getting out of there with no time to spare. You mean the enemy performed evasive maneuvers in a few seconds or less? Wouldn't that mean this mage could dodge all guided magic attacks? The basic concept in disciplined fire was to use a large volley of guided missiles to severely limit the enemy's ability to evade and try to get a direct hit. At the same time, the unit would eliminate the velocity of their opponent and use exploding formulas along a wide area in their flight path to catch them. If they couldn't lock on to or measure their opponent, however, it would be almost impossible to shoot effectively. They fought like a team, organized and continually coordinated. In other words, against an opponent on whom those tactics didn't work, there were far fewer benefits to fighting in groups, though not zero. The officers in the meeting gasped as their chests tightened. Not only had the observed mana value of the enemy computation orb gone way past the standard limit, but the mana was reducing, concentrating, and amplifying. Collisions of mana triggered by overlapping compound interference were creating multiple glows. A single Imperial mage had called on enough mana for several casters. The observation apparatus also returned a value that was off the scale. Absurd, but if that's the case... His comment cut off abruptly. They were all witnessing data that indicated a mana fixation reaction was occurring. The immeasurable profusion of mana detonated a phenomenon that mages and nations had attempted to achieve but finally given up on. In theory, it was impossible for a cast mana phenomenon to access spatial coordinates. Attempting fixation was madness. No one thought it could be done. It can't be. Impossible. The technology officer, who understood the significance better than anyone else, began denying reality, as if he had become unhinged. This was no longer mage technology, but something more from the realm of myths. If ye come to disrespect the fatherland, we shall pray unto God. The zoomed-in figure shocked them all. The picture may have been blurry and full of static, but what was shown was unmistakable. It's a child! The mage could still be described as quite young, yet she proclaimed annihilation and doom. Together with the mana reading, her cry was an omen of destruction. Supposing this God you pray to exists, is it the devil or the gods of destruction? Everyone cradled their heads. inspired to cling to the Lord. O Lord, save the fatherland. O Lord, grant me the strength to defeat my nation's enemies. However, the sentiments were pure. Her gaze was utterly innocent. Could she really be an enemy mage? She was only looking to God for help. Save us from the heathen invasion. O God, grant me the strength to slay our enemies. Should we really not be allowed to exist? They wanted to ask. Her gaze was that pious and judging. Attention, you are all trespassing on the Empire's territory. She spoke with the solemnity of a shrine maiden delivering a divine message. We will do our utmost to defend our fatherland, because behind us are people we must protect. What she said was backed by a sense of responsibility. It was as if defense was her only duty, and they could feel her fervid desire to protect the ones behind her. It was to fulfill that duty that she had stood before them. Answer me this. Why do you wish to invade the Empire, our homeland? Perhaps the 106th had sensed disaster. They concentrated their firepower to stop her with all their might. They tried to prevent her from casting even a little longer. O saints, believe in the blessings of our Lord. Let us be fearless. But reality was cruel. Fate was not on their side. Assuming God existed, he was smiling on her. Lament not your fate. O, the Lord has not forsaken us. The converging mana suddenly began to flood the observation apparatuses with noise. That meant there was enough mana accumulated to agitate space in the vicinity. At the distant end of our journey, let us reach the promised land. It was as if her words were both the key and Pandora's open box. The officers watching stopped thinking entirely and stared in horror as the monitor emitted a dreadful flash. Eventually, the computation orb was damaged and the video cut off. Dear God, have mercy on our souls. O Lord God, is this what you wanted? And thus concludes Chapter 3, The Watch/Guard of the Rhine. Chapter 4, War College, will be next. But first off, I just want to get my thoughts out here. So that was an insanely lengthy chapter. It was all of, I do believe, let me have a look here, from page 120 to page 194. So that took longer than expected. In terms of my thoughts on it, I think it was good. Like, I've read the manga already for this chapter, and I've seen the anime part that correlates to it. I was surprised at the introduction of Visha's roommate. She is a character that was edited out in the anime for whatever reason, and I don't know if she exists in the manga or not. I haven't seen her so far. It could be that I might have missed a few pages here and there, but I have not seen Visha's, Victoria Serebryakov's, or Sebriakov, I'm never really sure how to pronounce it, her roommate. So in the book, it seems she had a roommate at the military training academy who is a close friend of hers, and then she got sent to the front lines with Tanya, while her other friend, her friend got sent to the front lines as well with a different unit and in a different job position. So interesting change there, I think. I mean, I can kind of see why it was done, but yeah. Additional to that, I just think, oh my god, epic. It was so epic. Tanya basically just literally nuked them, or, I don't know, napalm, or what have you. The best thing I can compare it to maybe is like a Moab. Massive ordnance air blast, or air burst weapon, or mother of all bombs. Like, she literally just launched one of those on those sorry bastards and blew them away. So that was epic. Other things that are kind of noteworthy, like there was the no visas line that was used in the invasion of Dacia in the anime and the manga, for some reason, came up in this case on the Rhine front. And some other famous lines from the anime and the manga appear a lot earlier, and they're in this chapter in a different setting for whatever reason. Don't know why, but they came earlier. So in terms of delivery, and especially like just general mimetics of the whole thing, like the anime and the manga did it better on those key points, because I can't explain it. Like, they have become pop culture icons within fans of this series. Like, if you've seen the show, if you've read the manga, you'll get those references, whereas they're not as obvious or memeable or whatever in the book. So those are two other changes that I've noticed compared from the source material here to the other adaptations. Now, other things that are worthy of note. In terms of the artwork, I really do quite like the artwork here in the book, considerably more, I think, than the one in the anime in some respects. The manga's artwork was nice too, though. Like, all three have different styles for various reasons, but I digress. Speaking of, for my previous recordings of the other chapters, I hadn't included any of the artwork from those chapters in line. So for this version, I will be sure to do that because it was requested. Yeah. So those are my thoughts for this chapter, and I'm glad you've stayed with us for this entire run. It has been quite a lengthy video relative to the other ones. In any case, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day.